The love that felt too perfect to be real. The love that felt too perfect to be real was too perfect to be real. And this is the first truth about narcissistic relationships that most people understand only in retrospect, after the perfection has crumbled, and the person standing in the rubble can finally see that the perfection was manufactured, designed, and delivered with a precision that no genuine love could ever match. The beginning of a relationship with a narcissist does not feel like the beginning of a manipulation. It feels like the beginning of a fairy tale, the most intense, the most attentive, the most seemingly genuine love you have ever experienced. And the seeming is the mechanism, because the narcissist is not falling in love with you. They are performing love at you, studying your needs and reflecting them back with an accuracy that makes you feel, for the first time in your life, completely seen. The perfection is the first mind game. It is not a spontaneous overflow of feeling. It is a strategy, a calculated investment in your emotional dependency, designed to create a bond so intense and so fast that by the time the mask slips, you are already too attached to leave. Think of the beginning of a relationship that felt impossibly perfect, and how the impossibility was the clue you missed, the warning hidden inside the wonder, the sign that what you were receiving was not love, but a performance so flawless you could not tell it from the real thing. You do not need to examine any beginning tonight. Let the memory rest, perfect and false, and know that the love that felt too good to be true was telling you, from the very first moment, exactly what it was. They became exactly what you needed. They became exactly what you needed. And this is the tactic called mirroring. The narcissist's ability to study your desires, your wounds, your values, and your unmet needs, and then to reflect them back as their own personality, becoming, in the span of weeks or even days, the person you have been looking for your entire life. The mirroring is not empathy. It is reconnaissance, the careful observation of what you respond to, what makes your eyes light up, what makes you lean in, what makes you trust, and the strategic deployment of those observations as personality, as character, as who they really are. They like what you like. They believe what you believe. They have suffered the way you have suffered. They dream what you dream. And the matching is so precise, so detailed, so impossibly aligned that it produces the most intoxicating feeling a person can have. The feeling of having found your soulmate, the one who finally, completely understands. The mirror is not a person. It is a surface, reflecting your own needs back at you with enough accuracy to produce total enchantment. Think of how perfectly they seem to understand you, how they said exactly the right thing, shared exactly the right interests, felt exactly the right feelings, and how the exactness, which felt like destiny, was actually accuracy. The accuracy of someone who studied you the way a predator studies its terrain. You do not need to doubt any memory tonight. Let the mirroring rest, flattering and strategic, and know that the person who seemed to be your perfect match was not matching you. They were copying you, and the copy, because it was made from your own material, was always going to feel like home. The attention that was overwhelming. The attention that was overwhelming is the tactic called love bombing. The sustained, relentless, almost suffocating flood of attention, affection, communication, gifts, and presence that characterizes the early phase of a narcissistic relationship. The love bombing does not feel like a tactic. It feels like being adored, like being the center of someone's universe, like being loved with an intensity that no one has ever shown you before. The texts arrive constantly. The calls come morning and night. The compliments are endless. The attention is total. And the totality, which should be a warning, feels instead like a gift. The gift of being fully, completely, overwhelmingly wanted. Love bombing works because it exploits the human need to be seen and valued, flooding the target with so much positive attention that the target's defenses dissolve. Their skepticism melts, and the bond forms with a speed and a strength that no natural relationship could produce. The speed is the point. The narcissist needs you attached before you have time to evaluate, and the flooding ensures that the attachment forms before the thinking begins. Think of how quickly you became attached, and how the speed felt like chemistry when it was actually strategy. The deliberate acceleration of intimacy designed to bypass the evaluation that slower, genuine love would have allowed. You do not need to reconsider any attachment tonight. Let the overwhelming rest, and know that the love that arrived like a flood was designed to drown your judgment. And the drowning, which felt like swimming, was the first sign that you were in water you could not control. The future they painted for you. The future they painted for you is the tactic called future faking. The narcissist's habit of creating vivid, detailed, emotionally compelling visions of a shared future that they have no intention of building. A future designed not as a plan but as a hook. The image of the life you most want used as bait to keep you invested in a relationship that will never deliver what it promises. The future faking is specific. It mentions the house you will live in, the trips you will take, the family you will have, the life you will build together. And the specificity makes it feel real, makes the future feel like a mutual plan rather than a unilateral performance. And the feeling of a shared future is one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms available, because a person who believes they are building something with you is a person who will tolerate almost anything to protect the building. The future is the leash. As long as you believe in it, you stay. And the narcissist, who understands this perfectly, feeds the future in moments of doubt, replenishing the vision whenever the present becomes unbearable, using tomorrow's promise to excuse today's abuse. Think of the promises that were made and never kept, and how the promises, vivid and specific, kept you invested in something that was always a painting, never a blueprint. You do not need to mourn any future tonight. Let the painted future rest, beautiful and empty, and know that the life they described was never a plan. It was a tool, used to keep you tethered to a present that the future was designed to make you endure. The speed that should have warned you. The speed that should have warned you is the velocity of the early relationship, the rush, from strangers to soulmates in a matter of weeks. The acceleration that bypassed every normal stage of getting to know someone and landed you in deep emotional investment before you had a chance to evaluate what you were investing in. The speed is not passion, it is strategy. Genuine love develops slowly, through accumulation, through the gradual revelation of character over time, through the testing and the trusting that only patience can produce. The narcissistic bond skips all of this, not because the connection is so powerful that it does not need time, but because time is the narcissist's enemy, because time reveals character, and the character, given enough time, will be revealed as something very different from the mirror that was presented. The speed prevents the seeing. The intensity replaces the evaluating. And the person, swept up in the fastest, most intense emotional experience of their life, does not notice that the speed is doing the work that deception alone could not, bypassing the defenses by moving faster than the defenses can react. Think of how fast it happened, and how the speed felt like a sign of something real, when it was actually a sign of something urgent. The urgency of someone who needed you locked in before you had time to look clearly at what you were locking into. You do not need to slow anything down tonight. Let the speed rest, past and revealing, and know that the rush was not a measure of the connection's depth, but of the manipulator's need. And the need was always to secure you before you had time to see. They studied you before you knew. They studied you before you knew you were being studied. And this is one of the most unsettling truths about narcissistic relationships, that the person who seemed to understand you so effortlessly was not understanding you at all. They were reading you, the way a poker player reads an opponent, watching for tells, for vulnerabilities, for the specific emotional needs that would become the entry points for the manipulation. The narcissist's charm is not spontaneous. It is informed, built from observation, from testing, from the careful cataloging of what makes you respond, what makes you open, what makes you trust. They listen to your stories not to connect, but to collect, gathering the information they would later use to mirror you, to love bomb you, to future fake you, and to, eventually, control you. The information is the foundation. Every tactic that follows is built on the data gathered in the earliest encounters, the vulnerabilities you revealed without knowing you were revealing them, the wounds you shared without knowing they were being stored. Think of how much you told them early on, how safe it felt to share, and how the safety was manufactured to produce the sharing, the openness designed not to build intimacy, but to build a file. You do not need to guard any information tonight. Let the file rest, compiled and used, and know that the person who seemed to know you so well knew you the way a locksmith knows a lock, not through affection, but through the careful study of how to open you. The compliments that built a cage. The compliments that built a cage are the specific, targeted, strategically deployed praise that the narcissist uses not to celebrate you, but to create a dependency on their approval, so that the approval, once established as essential to your self-worth, can be withdrawn as a form of control. The compliments in the early phase are lavish, specific, and perfectly aimed at the parts of yourself you are most insecure about, the parts that most need validation. And the validation, when it arrives from someone you are falling in love with, is more intoxicating than any drug, because it fills a hole you may have been carrying your entire life. The trap is that the filling comes from outside, from the narcissist, and the dependency on the external validation once established gives the narcissist a lever they will use for the duration of the relationship, withholding the praise to punish, deploying it to reward, controlling your emotional state through the careful management of the approval you now need from them to feel okay about yourself. Think of how their compliments made you feel, and how the feeling became something you needed, and how the needing gave them the power to hurt you simply by stopping. You do not need any compliments tonight. Let the praise rest, given and withdrawn, and know that the compliments were never about you. They were about the dependency, the careful construction of a need that only they could fill, and the filling, once you could not do without it, became the cage. You felt chosen, and that was the point. You felt chosen, and that was the point, because the feeling of being chosen, of being selected from the crowd, of being the one they wanted above all others, is one of the most powerful emotional states a person can experience. And the narcissist, who understands this intuitively, manufactures the feeling with precision, making you feel uniquely special, uniquely seen, uniquely desired, not because you are to them, but because the feeling of being chosen creates a loyalty that is almost impossible to break. The chosen feeling is addictive because it speaks to the deepest human need, the need to be wanted, to be valued, to be preferred, And the narcissist's ability to activate this need and then position themselves as the sole source of its fulfillment is the core mechanism of the entire manipulation. Once you feel chosen, you are invested. Once you are invested, you will tolerate. And the tolerating, which begins as gratitude and ends as captivity, is the trajectory. The feeling of being chosen was always designed to produce. Think of how special they made you feel, and how the special feeling was the most effective trap, because a person who feels chosen does not question the chooser. You do not need to feel chosen tonight. Let the feeling rest, and know that the being chosen was the most calculated part of the entire performance, designed to produce the exact loyalty that would keep you in place when the performance changed. The intensity disguised as passion. The intensity disguised as passion is the emotional extremity of the early narcissistic relationship, the highs that are higher than any you have experienced and the lows that arrive, even early on, with a sharpness that should concern you, but that the highs make you willing to overlook. The intensity is not passion. It is instability, the rapid cycling between adoration and withdrawal, between overwhelming attention and sudden coolness, that keeps your nervous system in a state of perpetual arousal, unable to settle, unable to predict, and therefore unable to think clearly. The unpredictability is the mechanism. A relationship with consistent warmth produces secure attachment. A relationship with intermittent warmth produces anxious attachment, the bonding pattern in which the person never knows when the reward is coming and therefore never stops seeking it. The narcissist's intensity exploits this, creating a bond that is not based on love, but on anxiety. The desperate seeking of the high that is delivered just often enough to keep you addicted. Think of the emotional roller coaster and how you mistook the adrenaline for love, and how the ride, which felt like the most alive you had ever been, was actually the most manipulated. You do not need to ride anything tonight. Let the intensity rest, and know that the passion you felt was your nervous system responding to unpredictability, and the unpredictability, far from being a sign of exciting love, was the mechanism by which the control was installed. The vulnerability that was a performance. The vulnerability that was a performance is the narcissist's strategic sharing of personal pain, childhood wounds, or past traumas, deployed not as genuine intimacy, but as a tool for creating emotional closeness, and, simultaneously, for establishing a narrative in which they are the victim and you are the rescuer. The vulnerability looks real. The tears may be real. The story may be true. But the sharing is strategic, timed to coincide with the moments when your defenses need lowering, when your empathy needs activating, when your rescuer instinct needs triggering. And the triggering, once done, produces a bond that is not built on mutual openness, but on your compassion for their performed pain. The rescuer bond is one of the strongest bonds the narcissist can create, because a person who believes they are saving someone cannot easily leave, because leaving feels like abandoning someone in pain, and the guilt of the abandonment keeps the rescuer in place long after the relationship has become harmful. Think of the vulnerability they showed you, and how the showing made you feel needed, and how the needing kept you invested, and how the investment was built on a performance that looked like honesty. You do not need to rescue anyone tonight. Let the performance rest, and know that the vulnerability that drew you in was not an invitation to intimacy, but an installation of obligation. They made you feel like the only one. They made you feel like the only one. And this is the tactic of exclusivity. The narcissist's ability to make you feel that the connection you share is unique, unprecedented, incomparable, that no one has ever understood them the way you do, that no one has ever made them feel the way you do, and that the bond because it is one of a kind, must be protected at any cost. The exclusivity is a prison disguised as a privilege. It elevates the relationship to a status that makes leaving feel like destroying something sacred. And the sacred feeling, because it is tied to your identity as the one who understands, the one who is chosen, the one who sees them as they really are, makes the leaving a loss, not just of the relationship, but of the special status the relationship conferred. The exclusivity was never real. The narcissist has told the same story to every person before you and will tell it to every person after you. But the telling, each time, is done with such specificity and such intensity that each recipient believes they are the first. Think of how unique the connection felt, and how the uniqueness made you feel irreplaceable, and how the irreplaceability kept you in place. You do not need to feel unique tonight. Let the exclusivity rest, and know that the feeling of being the only one was the most effective chain. Because a person who believes they are irreplaceable will endure almost anything to protect the status they believe they alone. The charm that was never real. The charm that was never real is the whole of this tier gathered into a single, quiet recognition that the beginning of the relationship, the part you remember most fondly, the part you return to in your mind when you doubt your decision to leave, was a construction, a performance, a carefully designed experience built to produce attachment rather than to express love. The charm was the trap. The perfection was the bait. The intensity was the hook. And the person you fell in love with, the one who seemed to understand you perfectly, who loved you overwhelmingly, who chose you above everyone, was a role being played by someone who needed your attachment more than your happiness, and who built the attachment with a skill that genuine love does not need. Because genuine love does not need to be manufactured. It simply grows. Think of the beginning, and let it be what it was. Not the real them finally showing themselves, but the performed them doing what they do, and how the performance, however beautiful, was never the person, and the person, when they finally appeared, was someone the performance was designed to keep you from seeing until it was too late. You do not need to see anyone clearly tonight. Let the charm rest, performed and dissolved, and know that the most important thing you can understand about a narcissistic relationship is that the beginning, the part that felt most real, was the part that was most carefully constructed, and the construction, once you see it, can never again be mistaken for the love it was imitating. The jealousy they called love. The jealousy they called love is one of the earliest and most effective reframing tactics the narcissist uses. The transformation of possessiveness into a compliment. The presentation of controlling behavior as evidence of how deeply they care. They check your phone because they love you so much. They interrogate you about where you were because they cannot stand the thought of losing you. They react with rage to your friendships because their feelings for you are so intense they cannot bear to share. The jealousy is not love. It is ownership. The narcissist's need to control your attention, your time, and your emotional availability, disguised in the language of passion and devotion. The disguise works because the culture supports it. Because movies and songs and stories have taught you that jealousy is a sign of love's depth. And the teaching, absorbed uncritically, makes the possessiveness feel flattering rather than alarming. Think of the jealousy that was presented as devotion, and how the presentation changed how you received it, turning a warning sign into a love song, a red flag into a bouquet. You do not need to redefine any jealousy tonight. Let the reframing rest, and know that the jealousy was never about love. It was about control. The narcissist's need to be the center of your world, And the need, dressed as devotion, was the first quiet step in a process that would eventually make their need the only need that mattered in the relationship. The checking up disguised as caring. The checking up disguised as caring is the narcissist's surveillance system, deployed not as monitoring, but as concern. The constant texts, the repeated calls, the questions about where you are and who you are with, framed not as control but as worry, as the natural anxiety of someone who loves you and simply wants to know you are safe. The checking up feels caring because it is presented as caring, and the presentation is so convincing that protesting it makes you feel ungrateful, as though objecting to someone's concern is a sign of your coldness rather than their control. The escalation is gradual. The first check-in feels sweet. The 10th feels normal. The 100th feels like oxygen, so woven into the fabric of the relationship that you no longer notice it as monitoring, only as the texture of being together. And the texture, once normalized, provides the narcissist with a constant stream of information about your movements, your contacts, and your emotional state, all delivered voluntarily by you, because the monitoring was presented as love, and you responded to the love. Think of how gradually the checking increased, and how each increase felt like a natural extension of the caring, and how the caring accumulated, became a surveillance system you participated in willingly. You do not need to account for your movements tonight. Let the checking rest, and know that the person who always needed to know where you were was not worried about your safety. They were managing their control, and the managing, disguised as love, was invisible, because love was the only label it was ever given. They decided who you could see. They decided who you could see, and the deciding was never presented as a decision. It was presented as an observation, a gentle concern, a loving suggestion that certain people were not good for you, that certain friends were a bad influence, that certain family members were toxic, and the suggesting, because it came from someone who loved you, was received not as an attempt to isolate, but as wisdom, as the protective instinct of a partner who could see what you could not. The isolation is the narcissist's most important structural achievement, because a person with a strong support network is a person who can reality check the narcissist's version of events, and the reality checking threatens the narcissist's control. The friends who would say, "This is not normal," must be removed. The family who would say, "You deserve better," must be distanced. The colleagues who would notice the change in you must be kept at arm's length. Each removal is presented as your decision, arrived at through your own evaluation, when in fact the evaluation was shaped, gently and persistently, by the narcissist's commentary. Think of the people you lost during the relationship and how the losing felt like your choice, your growth, your maturation, when it was actually the narcissist's pruning, the careful removal of every branch that connected you to a reality they did not control. You do not need to reconnect with anyone tonight. Let the isolation rest, and know that the people you were encouraged to leave were the people the narcissist most needed you to leave, because they were the people who could see what was happening. The opinion you stopped having. The opinion you stopped having is the gradual silencing that occurs when every opinion you express is met with correction, dismissal, ridicule, or a subtle facial expression that communicates displeasure. And the accumulation of these responses, none of them dramatic enough to be called abuse, produces a person who stops expressing opinions entirely, not because they have none, but because the cost of expressing them has become too high. The narcissist does not tell you to be quiet. They make being quiet the path of least resistance, the only option that does not produce conflict, discomfort, or the exhausting process of defending a thought you should not have to defend. The silencing is incremental. Each individual correction seems minor. Each individual dismissal seems forgettable. But the accumulation is not minor, and the person who once had opinions, preferences, and perspectives has been shaped over months or years into someone who checks with the narcissist before saying anything, not out of respect, but out of the learned avoidance of the consequences of saying the wrong thing. Think of the opinions you stopped expressing and how the stopping was so gradual you did not notice you had gone silent until the silence was complete. You do not need to voice any opinion tonight. Let the silence rest and know that the voice you lost was not lost through a single event, but through 1,000 small corrections that taught you, quietly and effectively, that having a voice was not worth the cost. They made your friends the enemy. They made your friends the enemy, and the making was done not through direct prohibition, but through narrative. The ongoing, quietly delivered story that your friends did not really care about you, that they were jealous of your relationship, that they were talking about you behind your back, that they were a negative influence, that they did not have your best interests at heart. The narrative is dripped, not poured, a comment here, an observation there, a well-timed sigh when a friend's name is mentioned, and the dripping, over time, erodes the foundation of the friendships the way water erodes stone, not through force, but through persistence. The narcissist does not need to forbid the friendships. They need only to contaminate them, to introduce enough doubt and enough negativity that the friendships become uncomfortable, and the discomfort, because it is easier to avoid than to address, leads you to pull away from the people who would have been your lifeline. Think of how your perception of your friends changed during the relationship, and how the changing felt like your own seeing when it was actually the narcissist's narrating. You do not need to reevaluate any friendships tonight. Let the narrative rest, dripped and absorbed, and know that the friends who were turned into enemies were almost always the friends the narcissist feared most, because they were the friends who could see through the performance. The help that made you helpless. The help that made you helpless is the narcissist's strategic overfunctioning, the taking over of tasks, decisions, and responsibilities that you are perfectly capable of handling, presented as generosity and love, but functioning as a slow erosion of your independence. They handle the finances because they want to take that burden off you. They make the decisions because they know best. They manage the logistics because you should not have to worry. And the managing, which feels like support, gradually removes your competence, your confidence, and your ability to function independently. Because a skill that is not practiced atrophies, and the narcissist, by taking over, ensures that the atrophy occurs. The helplessness is not natural. It is manufactured, produced by a person who needs you dependent and who achieves the dependency not by breaking you, but by helping you until you can no longer help yourself. Think of the capabilities you lost during the relationship, the things you could do before that you could not do during, and how the losing was presented as being cared for. You do not need to reclaim any capability tonight. Let the helplessness rest, manufactured and reversible, and know that the help was never about you. It was about the dependency, the quiet creation of a person who could not leave because they had been helped into the inability to function alone. The criticism wrapped in concern. The criticism wrapped in concern is the narcissist's method of dismantling your self-esteem while appearing to care about you. The delivery of negative messages inside a caring frame so that the message cannot be challenged without challenging the care. I am only saying this because I love you. I just want the best for you. Someone needs to be honest with you. The frame is concern. The content is criticism. And the criticism, arriving inside the frame of someone who cares, bypasses the defenses that would reject the same criticism from a stranger because the person delivering it is trusted, and the trust makes the poison digestible. The criticism escalates gradually. It starts with appearance, then behavior, then character, then intelligence, then worth. And each step, delivered with concern, is accepted because the concern makes the accepting feel like maturity, like the grown-up ability to receive feedback, when it is actually the slow erosion of self-worth performed by someone who needs your self-worth low enough that you will not leave. Think of the criticism you received from them and how the framing made you thank them for the very thing that was diminishing you. You do not need to receive any criticism tonight. Let the concern rest, framed and false, and know that the person who consistently criticizes you under the banner of care is not caring for you. They are controlling you, using your trust as the delivery system for the message that you are not enough. And the message, delivered by someone you love, lands deeper than any stranger's cruelty ever could. The rules that only applied to you. The rules that only applied to you are the double standards the narcissist maintains without ever acknowledging them. The specific, enforced expectations for your behavior that they exempt themselves from entirely. You must be transparent. They are entitled to privacy. You must be loyal. They may do as they please. You must be accountable. They are above accountability. The rules are presented as reasonable expectations for a healthy relationship, and the presenting is convincing enough that you accept them, not noticing that the same rules are never applied in the other direction. The asymmetry is the point. The rules are not about building a fair relationship. They are about establishing a hierarchy, a system in which you are held to standards that the narcissist is free to violate, and the violation, when you point it out, is met with deflection, denial, or the accusation that you are the one being unreasonable. Think of the rules you followed and the rules they broke, and how the same behavior that was unacceptable from you was unremarkable from them. You do not need to enforce any rules tonight. Let the double standard rest, visible and undeniable, and know that the rules were never about fairness. They were about power, the establishment of a system in which your behavior was managed and theirs was free. The privacy you were not allowed. The privacy you were not allowed is the narcissist's elimination of your personal space, the insistence on access to your phone, your conversations, your thoughts, your time alone, and the framing of any resistance as evidence of secrecy, dishonesty, or betrayal. The demand for access is presented as openness, as the natural transparency of a relationship with nothing to hide, and the presentation makes refusal feel like guilt, as though wanting privacy is evidence of wrongdoing rather than a basic human need. The narcissist's access is total. Your access to them is managed. They read your messages. You may not read theirs. They question your conversations. You may not question theirs. The asymmetry, again, is the point. But the framing, which makes the demand sound like a shared value, disguises the asymmetry behind the language of trust and openness. Think of the privacy you surrendered and how the surrendering felt like an act of love when it was actually an act of submission. You do not need to guard any privacy tonight. Let the boundaries rest, dissolved and rebuilding, and know that the demand for total access was never about trust. It was about surveillance, the need to monitor the person whose independent thinking threatened the narcissist's control. The apology they used against you. The apology they used against you is the tactic of storing your apologies, your admissions of fault, and your vulnerable moments of self-blame, and then deploying them later as evidence against you, as proof that you are the problem. as ammunition in arguments that bear no relation to the original apology. You said you were sorry for being too sensitive. They remind you of this every time you express a feeling. You admitted you overreacted. They cite this every time you react to anything. The apology, which was offered in good faith, is weaponized, turned from an act of accountability into a permanent record of your flaws, stored and reused indefinitely. The tactic works because the apology is real. You did say it. You did admit it. And the narcissist, by replaying your own words, makes the manipulation invisible because they are not inventing the criticism. They are quoting you, and the quoting, because it uses your own words, feels unchallengeable. Think of the things you admitted and how the admissions were used, not as evidence of your growth, but as weapons for your control. You do not need to take anything back tonight. Let the apologies rest, given and misused, and know that the person who stores your vulnerabilities as ammunition is not someone who valued your honesty. They are someone who saw your honesty as a supply of tools. The favor that became a debt. The favor that became a debt is the narcissist's transactional approach to generosity, the giving of gifts, help, and support that is never freely given but always quietly scored, creating an invisible ledger of obligation that is presented at the narcissist's convenience as proof that you owe them, that you are ungrateful, that you would be nothing without what they provided. The favor was never a gift. It was an investment, placed with the expectation of return. And the return is not reciprocal kindness but compliance. The willingness to tolerate behavior you would not tolerate from someone who had not done so much for you. The narcissist reminds you of the favor not to celebrate their generosity, but to enforce your obligation. And the enforcement, because it is based on real things they did for you, is almost impossible to argue with. Think of the things they did for you and how the doing was used, later, as a chain. You do not need to repay any debt tonight. Let the favors rest, given and counted, and know that the generosity was never generous. It was strategic. Each favor a link in a chain designed to keep you tethered by gratitude to a person who was never giving you anything without calculating what it would cost you later. The small concession that cost everything. The small concession that cost everything is the pattern of small surrenders, each one insignificant on its own, that accumulated into a total loss of autonomy. The slow, step-by-step giving away of your preferences, your boundaries, your choices, and yourself, one small accommodation at a time, until the person who entered the relationship was unrecognizable inside it. Each concession was small. Each one seemed reasonable. Each one was framed as compromise, as the normal give and take of a loving relationship, and the framing made each individual surrender feel like a healthy adjustment rather than a loss. But the concessions were not reciprocal. They moved in one direction, from you to them, each one widening the space they occupied and shrinking the space you were allowed. And the shrinking, because it happened incrementally, was invisible until you looked up and realized you had no space left. Think of the small things you gave up, the preferences you set aside, the boundaries you moved, and how each one seemed like nothing, and the total was everything. You do not need to reclaim any space tonight. Let the concessions rest, small and devastating, and know that the strategy was never one big demand, but 100 small ones, each one too small to refuse, and all of them together enough to erase you. The cage that looked like a home. The cage that looked like a home is the whole of this tier gathered into a single, quiet recognition that the control was never visible as control because it was always dressed as love, as concern, as caring, as the natural behavior of someone who simply loved you too much to let you go. and the dressing was so convincing that the cage, by the time you recognized it, felt like home, the only environment you knew, the only relationship you could imagine. The walls so familiar, they were no longer visible as walls. The cage was built from jealousy called love, checking up called caring, isolation called protection, criticism called honesty, and help called generosity. Each component indistinguishable from the loving thing it was imitating, each one serving the narcissist's control while wearing the narcissist's love. Think of the relationship as a room, and how comfortable the room felt, and how the comfort disguised the fact that the door was locked, and the locking was done so gently, so lovingly, so gradually, that you did not hear it close. You do not need to open any doors tonight. Let the cage rest, recognized and dissolving, and know that the recognition itself is the opening. The moment you see the walls for what they are, and the seeing, however late it comes, is the beginning of the freedom the cage was designed to prevent. That never happened. That never happened is the foundational gaslighting phrase, the flat, confident denial of something you experienced, something you remember, something you know to be true, delivered with enough certainty that your own certainty begins to waver. The narcissist does not argue about what happened. They delete it, erasing the event from the shared narrative with a denial so absolute that questioning it feels like insanity rather than honesty. The power of the denial is in its totality. The narcissist does not say they remember it differently. They say it did not happen, and the saying, delivered without hesitation, without doubt, without a flicker of uncertainty, creates a collision between your memory and their statement, in which your memory, because it now stands alone and unconfirmed, begins to feel unreliable. The gaslighting works because humans are social creatures who rely on shared reality. And when the person closest to you denies a shared experience, the brain, rather than concluding the other person is lying, often concludes that its own memory is wrong, because the alternative, that the person you love is deliberately rewriting reality, is too frightening to accept. Think of a time someone denied something you know happened, and how the denial did not just challenge the event, but challenged your mind, your memory, your ability to trust what you perceived. You do not need to verify any memory tonight. Let the past rest, happened and denied, and know that the phrase that never happened is not a statement about the event. It is a statement about power. The narcissist's assertion that their version of reality is the only version, and yours, however accurate, does not count. You are too sensitive. You are too sensitive is the narcissist's most efficient dismissal, the phrase that accomplishes two things simultaneously: invalidating your emotional response and reframing the problem from their behavior to your reaction, so that the conversation, which should have been about what they did, becomes about what is wrong with you. The phrase does not engage with the content of your feeling. It does not ask why you feel what you feel. It dismisses the feeling itself as a defect in you, a malfunction in your emotional system. And the dismissal, because it comes from someone you trust, lands not as an opinion, but as a diagnosis. The expert assessment of a person who knows you well and is sadly informing you that you are broken. The phrase is devastating because it teaches you to doubt your own emotional responses, to second-guess every feeling, to wonder before expressing anything, whether the expression is valid or whether you are, once again, being too sensitive, too much, too emotional, too everything. The narcissist has trained you to believe you are. Think of how many times you swallowed a feeling because you had been told the feeling was the problem, and how the swallowing became automatic, and how the automatic, over time, disconnected you from your own emotional truth. You do not need to validate any feeling tonight. Let the sensitivity rest, real and dismissed, and know that the feelings you were told were too much were almost always the appropriate response to something that was genuinely wrong. And the too much was never about your feeling. It was about their need for the feeling to stop. The memory they changed in front of you. The memory they changed in front of you is one of the most disorienting gaslighting techniques. The narcissist's ability to rewrite a shared experience while you are both still standing in it, altering the details, the sequence, the meaning, and the emotional content of what just happened with such confidence that your own fresh memory begins to warp in real time. You both said something. You both heard it. And now, minutes later, they are describing a different conversation, one in which they said something kinder or you said something worse, and the description, delivered with absolute certainty, collides with your memory of what just occurred. And the collision, because it is between a fresh memory and a confident contradiction, produces a disorientation so specific to gaslighting that it has its own sensation, a dizziness, a feeling of the ground shifting, a moment in which you genuinely do not know which version is real. The technique works because memory is malleable, as the cognitive biases video described, and the narcissist, whether consciously or instinctively, exploits the malleability, inserting their version into the fresh, still-forming memory, and allowing the insertion to overwrite the original. Think of a conversation that was rewritten while you were still in it, and how the rewriting made you feel dizzy rather than angry, and how the dizziness was the sign that the gaslighting was working. You do not need to verify any conversation tonight. Let the memory rest, original and overwritten, and know that the dizziness was not confusion. It was the sensation of having your reality edited in real time by someone who needed their version to be the only version. The conversation that never existed. The conversation that never existed is the narcissist's selective amnesia, the complete denial of a discussion that took place, an agreement that was made, a promise that was given, erased from their memory so completely that you are left holding the evidence of a conversation only you attended. You agreed to this. They have no memory of it. You discussed this. They never said that. You made plans. They were never part of the planning. The selective amnesia is not a memory problem. It is a strategy, the deliberate erasure of any conversation that would hold the narcissist accountable, that would commit them to something they no longer want to deliver, or that would establish a fact they need to be flexible. The amnesia is always selective. They remember everything that serves them and forget everything that binds them. And the selectivity, because it is presented as genuine forgetting, cannot be challenged without calling them a liar. And calling them a liar produces a confrontation the narcissist is always better prepared for than you are. Think of the agreements that vanished, the discussions that were deleted, and how each deletion left you wondering whether the conversation happened or whether you imagined it. You do not need to confirm any conversation tonight. Let the vanished rest, and know that the conversations were real, the promises were made, and the forgetting was the narcissist's escape hatch, the ability to unmake any commitment simply by denying it was ever made. They made you doubt your own eyes. They made you doubt your own eyes, and this is gaslighting at its most fundamental. The systematic undermining of your ability to trust your own perception so that the person who should be the most reliable witness to their own experience, which is you, becomes the least reliable, deferring to the narcissist's version of reality, because your own version has been discredited so many times that you no longer trust it. The undermining does not happen through a single dramatic denial. It happens through the accumulation of small contradictions, each one insignificant on its own, each one eroding a thin layer of trust in your perception, until the erosion reaches the foundation and the entire structure of self-trust collapses. The person who has been gaslighted does not know they have been gaslighted because the gaslighting has destroyed the very instrument, self-trust, that would have been needed to detect it. Think of the moment you stopped trusting yourself and how the stopping was not a decision but an erosion. The gradual wearing away of your confidence in your own perception until the wearing felt normal and the not trusting felt like humility, when it was actually the product of someone else's sustained, deliberate campaign against your mind. You do not need to trust anything tonight. Let the doubt rest and know that the doubt was never yours. It was installed, one denial at a time, by a person who needed you to doubt yourself, because a person who trusts their own eyes is a person who can see what the narcissist is doing. The truth they told you was a lie. The truth they told you was a lie is the narcissist's most sophisticated deception. The delivery of technically true statements arranged to produce a false impression. A version of honesty that is more dishonest than any straightforward lie because it uses truth as the vehicle for the deception. They tell you they were at the office. They were at the office for 5 minutes before going somewhere else. They tell you they spoke to a friend. They spoke to the friend about the affair they are having. The statement is true. The impression is false. And the person who discovers the deception is told they are the problem. Because the narcissist did not lie, they told the truth. And the truth, technically unassailable, becomes the shield behind which the deception hides. Think of the truths that were used to mislead you, and how the truths, because they were verifiable, made the deception invisible, and how the invisibility made you doubt your suspicion rather than their honesty. You do not need to verify any truth tonight. Let the honest lies rest, and know that the most effective deception is not the obvious lie, but the arranged truth, the facts deployed like chess pieces in positions that produce a picture. The facts themselves do not support. The lie they told you was the truth. The lie they told you was the truth is the mirror image. The narcissist's ability to deliver a complete fabrication with such confidence, such emotional conviction, and such detailed specificity that the lie becomes, in your experience, indistinguishable from the truth. The narcissist does not lie nervously. They lie calmly, fluently, with the same emotional tone they use for genuine statements. And the tone, which is the primary cue your brain uses to evaluate honesty, produces no alarm, because the alarm system, designed to detect discomfort in the speaker, detects nothing. The narcissist is comfortable lying because the lie serves them, and the serving feels, to them, as natural as the truth. The person being lied to receives no signal, no warning, no gut feeling, because the liar is not conflicted, and the lack of conflict in the delivery produces a lack of detection in the receiver. Think of a lie you believed completely, and how the believing was not gullibility, but the absence of any signal that would have triggered doubt, and how the absence was the narcissist's comfort with deception. You do not need to detect any lies tonight. Let the fabrications rest, believed and uncovered, and know that the inability to detect the lie was not a failure of your intelligence, but a feature of theirs. The unsettling ability to deliver untruth with the emotional signature of truth. The crazy they made you feel. The crazy they made you feel is the cumulative effect of sustained gaslighting, the end state of a process that began with small denials and escalated to a complete destruction of your confidence in your own mind. The word crazy is the narcissist's nuclear option, the label deployed when the gaslighting has done its work, and the person, overwhelmed by the contradictions between their perception and the narcissist's assertions, begins to wonder genuinely, whether they are losing their mind. The wondering is the goal. A person who thinks they might be crazy is a person who will not trust their own perception, will not challenge the narcissist's version, will not leave the relationship because they cannot trust their judgment about whether the relationship is harmful. The crazy label is both the weapon and the insurance, keeping the person trapped by their own self-doubt, unable to act, because the instrument they need to evaluate the situation, their own mind, has been discredited by the very person the evaluation would have exposed. Think of the moments you genuinely wondered whether you were losing your mind, and how the wondering was not a sign of your instability, but a sign of the gaslighting's effectiveness. You do not need to prove your sanity tonight. Let the crazy rest, felt and false, and know that the person who made you feel crazy was the person who needed you to feel crazy. Because a person who trusts their own mind is a person who can see clearly, and clear seeing was the one thing they could not allow. The evidence that kept disappearing. The evidence that kept disappearing is the narcissist's habit of removing, deleting, or altering any physical evidence that would confirm your version of events. The texts that were erased, the photos that were deleted, the objects that were moved, the paper trail that was conveniently lost, leaving you with nothing but your memory, which has already been undermined, to support a reality the narcissist is actively denying. The disappearance of evidence is strategic. It does not happen randomly. It happens precisely when evidence would be most damaging, when a text would prove what was said, when a photo would show where they were, when a document would confirm what they promised. The disappearance is always deniable, always attributable to accident or to the normal flux of digital life. And the deniability makes the pattern invisible, because each individual disappearance has a plausible explanation, and the pattern, which is the only proof that the disappearances are deliberate, is visible only to the person looking for it. Think of the evidence that vanished, and how the vanishing left you standing with nothing but your word, and how your word, already undermined by gaslighting, was not enough. You do not need to gather any evidence tonight. Let the disappeared rest, and know that the removal of evidence is not carelessness, but control. The narcissist managing the record to ensure that the only version of events that survives is theirs. They rewrote the fight while you watched. They rewrote the fight while you watched, and this is the narcissist's post-conflict rewriting, the immediate revision of an argument that just happened, so that the aggressor becomes the victim. The valid point becomes the irrational attack, and the person who is defending themselves becomes the person who started the fight. The rewriting is instant. The argument ends, and the narcissist's version begins. A version in which your tone was the problem, your words were hurtful, your behavior was unacceptable, and their behavior, which triggered the argument, is either minimized or erased entirely. The rewriting is so fast and so confident that it creates a second reality layered on top of the first, and the two versions, yours and theirs, compete for dominance in your mind, and theirs, because it is delivered with certainty, and yours is already shaken by the gaslighting, often wins. Think of a fight that was immediately rewritten, and how the rewriting left you apologizing for the argument you did not start, defending yourself for the reaction you were provoked into, and carrying the guilt for a conflict that was manufactured by someone who then rewrote the manufacturing. You do not need to relitigate any argument tonight. Let the rewriting rest, and know that the version of the fight you remember is almost certainly more accurate than the version they presented, and the presenting, however confident, was the narcissist's final move in a game where controlling the narrative of the conflict was always more important than resolving it. Your feelings were the problem, not their behavior. And this is the narcissist's most consistent reframing, the relentless redirection of every conflict from what they did to how you responded, so that the conversation, which should address their behavior, addresses your reaction instead. You are not upset because they did something hurtful. You are upset because you are oversensitive. You are not angry because they broke a promise. You are angry because you have anger issues. You are not crying because they were cruel. You are crying because you are emotionally unstable. The reframing is total. The behavior disappears. The reaction remains. And the person whose behavior caused the reaction is now the person evaluating the reaction calmly, reasonably, from a position of concerned superiority, while you, the person who is hurt, are now the person being diagnosed. Think of how many conversations about their behavior ended with you defending your reaction, and how the defending meant the behavior was never addressed, and how the not addressing was the purpose of the reframing all along. You do not need to defend any reaction tonight. Let the feelings rest, valid and reframed, and know that the redirection from their behavior to your response was the most effective way the narcissist had of ensuring that their behavior was never, ever, the reality only they could define. The reality only they could define is the end state of the gaslighting, the point at which you have been so thoroughly undermined that you no longer attempt to define reality yourself, deferring instead to the narcissist's version, checking with them before trusting your own perception, waiting for their confirmation before believing your own experience. The deferring is not voluntary. It is the product of a sustained campaign against your self-trust, a campaign so thorough that the person at its center no longer knows where their perception ends and the narcissist's begins. The narcissist has become the sole authority on what is real, and the authority, because it was established through the destruction of your alternative, feels like clarity rather than control. Think of how much you deferred, how often you checked, how automatically you turned to them to confirm what your own senses had already told you, and how the turning, which felt like communication, was actually the final surrender of your perceptual autonomy. You do not need to define any reality tonight. Let the authority rest, transferred and reclaiming, and know that the reality you could not define without them was not a reality at all. It was their reality, imposed so thoroughly that you forgot you had ever had your own. The mind that stopped trusting itself. The mind that stopped trusting itself is the whole of this tier gathered into a single tender recognition that the gaslighting's deepest damage was not to your memory or your perception, but to your relationship with your own mind, the destruction of the trust between you and the only instrument you have for navigating reality. The narcissist did not break your mind. They broke your trust in your mind, which is worse, because a mind that does not trust itself is a mind that cannot use itself. And a mind that cannot use itself is a mind that must rely on someone else's. And the someone else, in this case, was the person who broke the trust in the first place. Think of how it felt to not trust yourself, to second-guess every perception, to wonder whether your memory was accurate, whether your feelings were valid, whether your experience of reality was real, and how the wondering was the most painful consequence of the relationship, more painful than any specific lie, because the wondering attacked not what you knew, but your ability to know anything at all. You do not need to trust yourself perfectly tonight. Let the mind rest, doubted and rebuilding, and know that the trust that was destroyed can be rebuilt, slowly, through the repeated experience of your own perception being confirmed by people who are not invested in its destruction, and the confirming, which is what safe relationships do, is the antidote to every denial the narcissist ever delivered. The silence that was a punishment. The silence that was a punishment is the silent treatment, one of the narcissist's most devastating and most deniable weapons. The withdrawal of all communication, all warmth, all acknowledgement of your existence, deployed not as a need for space, but as a punishment for something you did that the narcissist has decided is unforgivable. Though the offense is often so minor, you cannot identify it. The silent treatment is not silence. It is a performance of absence, a deliberate, sustained demonstration of your dispensability, designed to activate your deepest fear of abandonment and to keep it activated for as long as the narcissist needs you afraid. The silence communicates more than any words could, a contempt so total that it does not even need to explain itself, and the not explaining is part of the punishment, because you are left not only with the silence, but with the guessing, the frantic internal search for what you did wrong, the review of every recent interaction for the offense you cannot find. The guessing is the mechanism. While you are guessing, you are not challenging. While you are searching for your fault, questioning theirs. And the searching, which can last hours or days, keeps you in a state of anxious compliance, ready to apologize for anything, ready to agree to anything, just to make the silence stop. Think of how the silence felt. The cold, the absence, the terror of the void, and how you would have done anything to end it. You do not need to fill any silence tonight. Let the quiet rest, peaceful and unpunishing, and know that the silence that was used against you was never about what you did. It was about what they needed, which was your fear, your compliance, and your willingness to erase yourself to make the cold go away. The rage that came from nowhere. The rage that came from nowhere is the narcissistic rage, the sudden, explosive, disproportionate anger that erupts in response to a perceived slight, so minor that you often cannot identify what triggered it. Because the trigger was not the event, but the narcissist's interpretation of the event. The reading of a harmless comment as an insult, a neutral expression as contempt, a reasonable request as an attack on their authority. The rage is not a reaction. It is a weapon, deployed to punish, to intimidate, and to establish that certain topics, certain tones, and certain behaviors are dangerous, so that you, having experienced the explosion, will avoid those topics, tones, and behaviors in the future, shrinking your own self-expression to fit inside the narrow space the narcissist's rage has defined as safe. The rage works by teaching fear. A single explosion can control behavior for months because the person who experienced the rage does not need to be reminded. They remember. They adjust. They walk carefully. And the walking carefully, which becomes permanent, is the rage's lasting achievement. The installation of a fear that does not require repetition because it is maintained by the memory of what happened last time. Think of the rage and how it changed your behavior, how the explosion taught you what not to say, what not to do, what not to be. You do not need to walk carefully tonight. Let the rage rest, past and powerless, and know that the rage was never about what you did. It was about what you would stop doing afterward. The tears that were a tactic. The tears that were a tactic are the narcissist's use of visible emotion to redirect a conversation, to derail an accountability moment, to transform themselves from the person being confronted into the person being hurt, so that you, the person with the legitimate grievance, find yourself comforting the person who caused it. The tears arrive at strategic moments. You bring up a concern and they cry. You set a boundary and they break down. You express anger, and they collapse into sorrow. The tears may be genuine. The narcissist may genuinely feel upset, but the upset is not about your pain. It is about their discomfort at being confronted. And the tears, whether manufactured or real, serve the function of making the confrontation stop. Because a person who is crying cannot be held accountable without the holder appearing cruel. The tears exploit your empathy, turning your compassion into a weapon against yourself. Because the compassionate person cannot continue the confrontation in the face of visible suffering. And the stopping of the confrontation is the tears' purpose. Think of the times you dropped your legitimate complaint because they started crying, and how the dropping felt like compassion when it was actually capitulation. You do not need to hold anyone accountable tonight. Let the tears rest, strategic and effective, and know that the tears that arrived every time you tried to address something were not a response to your cruelty, but a response to their exposure. The emotions deployed not to communicate, but to prevent the communication that would have changed the dynamic. The guilt they manufactured from nothing. The guilt they manufactured from nothing is the narcissist's ability to make you feel guilty for things that require no guilt, for having needs, for setting boundaries, for spending time with friends, for being happy without them, for existing as a separate person with a separate life. The guilt does not come from your actions. It comes from the narcissist's framing, the presentation of your normal, healthy behavior as selfish, as hurtful, as evidence that you do not care about them enough, and the framing, because it comes from the person whose opinion matters most, produces a guilt so deep and so automatic that you stop evaluating whether the guilt is justified and start simply avoiding the behavior that triggers it. The manufacturing is constant. Every independence is an abandonment. Every joy is a betrayal. Every need is a selfishness. And the person at the center of the manufacturing, the narcissist, appears not as the source of the guilt, but as the victim of your inadequacy, the long-suffering partner whose only crime was loving someone who does not love them back enough. Think of the guilt you carry that has no justifiable source, the feeling of having done something wrong when you did nothing wrong, and how the feeling was installed by a person who needed your guilt to maintain their control. You do not need to feel guilty about anything tonight. Let the manufactured rest, false and dissolving, and know that the guilt you carry may not be yours at all, but something that was placed in you by someone who needed you guilty to keep you. The shame they kept you marinating in. The shame they kept you marinating in is the sustained atmosphere of not being enough that the narcissist maintains through a combination of subtle criticism, unfavorable comparisons, expressions of disappointment, and the continuous implication that you are failing at the job of being their partner. The shame is not a single event. It is an environment, a constant emotional climate that you live inside, the way you live inside air. So pervasive it becomes invisible. So normal it becomes the baseline. And the baseline, which is the steady feeling that you are inadequate, shapes everything. Your confidence, your behavior, your willingness to speak, your ability to set boundaries, and your tolerance for treatment you would not have tolerated before. The shame lowered your expectations of what you deserve. The narcissist does not need to shame you dramatically. They need only to maintain the atmosphere, to keep the temperature of your self-worth low enough that you do not reach for something better. And the maintaining is done through 1,000 small signals that add up to one large message, which is that you are lucky to be with them and should not risk losing what you do not deserve. Think of the background feeling of inadequacy you carried during the relationship, and how the feeling was not a response to a specific event, but an atmosphere that was always there. You do not need to feel inadequate tonight. Let the shame rest, atmospheric and false, and know that the inadequacy you felt was the climate someone else set. And the climate, now that you are outside it, can be changed to something that allows you, finally, to breathe. The love they gave and took away. The love they gave and took away is intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful bonding mechanism in behavioral psychology, the pattern of unpredictable reward and withdrawal that produces an attachment stronger than any consistent love could create. The narcissist gives love warmly, intensely, overwhelmingly, and then withdraws it without warning, without explanation, without any change in your behavior that would account for the change in theirs, and the withdrawal, because it is unpredictable, keeps you in a state of constant vigilance, watching for signs, reading moods, adjusting behavior, trying to figure out the formula that brings the love back. The formula does not exist. The unpredictability is the formula. The love is given and taken, not based on what you do, but based on the narcissist's need. And the need changes without pattern, producing a bond that is not built on love, but on anxiety. The desperate, addictive seeking of a reward that is delivered just often enough to keep you hooked, and just unpredictably enough to keep you seeking. Think of the love that came and went, and how the going made the coming more intense, and how the intensity felt like depth when it was actually desperation. You do not need to seek any love tonight. Let the intermittent rest, and know that the strongest attachment you ever felt may not have been the deepest love, but the most effective conditioning. Your nervous system bonded, not to the person but to the pattern, and the pattern, which felt like passion, was the mechanism of the trap. The tenderness that had conditions. The tenderness that had conditions is the narcissist's deployment of warmth as a reward for compliance. The gentle, loving, attentive version of themselves that appears only when you are behaving as they wish, and that vanishes the moment you deviate. The tenderness is real while it lasts. The warmth is genuine while you are compliant. And the genuineness is what makes the conditioning so effective. Because the warmth, when it arrives, is so good, so needed, so healing, that the person receiving it will adjust anything, sacrifice anything, suppress anything to keep it arriving. The tenderness is not love. It is a payment, the narcissist's currency for the compliance they need. And the payment, because it feels like love, makes the transaction invisible. You are not being rewarded for obedience. You are being loved for being yourself, or so it feels, until you deviate, and the love vanishes. And the vanishing teaches you, with a clarity no words could match, exactly what your being yourself costs. Think of the warmth that appeared when you were agreeable, and the cold that arrived when you were not, and how the appearing and the arriving trained you, over time, to be whatever the warmth required. You do not need to earn any tenderness tonight. Let the warmth rest, unconditional for once, and know that tenderness with conditions is not tenderness at all, but a wage, paid for the labor of being what someone else needs you to be. The threat disguised as a feeling. The threat disguised as a feeling is the narcissist's use of emotional expression to communicate a consequence without stating it directly. The "I do not know what I would do if you left." That is not a feeling but a warning. The "I cannot live without you." That is not a declaration of love, but an installation of guilt. The "I just get so upset when you talk to other people." That is not vulnerability but a boundary set on your freedom through the language of their pain. The threat is never stated as a threat. It is felt, implied, communicated through the emotional channel so that it arrives as empathy rather than as ultimatum. And the arriving, because it uses the empathy pathway, bypasses the defenses that would reject an overt threat and instead activates the caretaking response that the narcissist needs to maintain control. The person receiving the disguised threat does not feel threatened. They feel responsible, burdened with the narcissist's well-being as though it were a hostage. And the hostage, which is the narcissist's emotional state, is used to control the person's behavior without ever making an explicit demand. Think of the feelings that were really warnings and how the warnings, because they were delivered as emotions, were impossible to challenge. You do not need to respond to any implied threat tonight. Let the disguise rest and know that the person who communicated consequences through feelings was not sharing their vulnerability, but deploying it. The victim they always became. The victim they always became is the narcissist's most reliable escape from accountability. The instantaneous transformation from perpetrator to victim that occurs the moment they are confronted. The pivot so smooth and so practiced that the person who just did something hurtful is, within seconds, the person who is being hurt. And you, the person who was hurt, are now the person who is causing the pain. The pivot is not a conscious strategy in most cases. It is an automatic response. The narcissist's ego, unable to tolerate the experience of being in the wrong, and therefore instantly reframing the situation so that wrongness belongs to someone else. The pivot produces a specific, disorienting experience for the person confronting them. The feeling of having your reality reversed in real time. The accusation becoming the defense. The victim becoming the aggressor. The clear-cut situation becoming a confused, muddled, unclear mess in which you can no longer remember who was hurt and who did the hurting. Think of the times you approached them with a legitimate complaint and left the conversation apologizing, and how the reversal happened so quickly you could not track it. You do not need to confront anyone tonight. Let the victim role rest, performed and effective, and know that the person who always ended up being the victim was almost never the person being victim. The punishment for your happiness. The punishment for your happiness is one of the most painful patterns in a narcissistic relationship. The observation that your positive emotions, your joy, your excitement, your success, your laughter, are consistently met with withdrawal, criticism, sabotage, or the manufacturing of a crisis, so that the happiness is always cut short, always undermined, always followed by a consequence that teaches you, over time, that being happy is not safe. The narcissist punishes your happiness not because they dislike seeing you happy, but because your happiness represents your independence, your self-sufficiency, your ability to feel good without them as the source. And the independence threatens their position as the sole provider of your emotional well-being. A person who can be happy without the narcissist is a person who might leave, and the leaving must be prevented. And the prevention is achieved by ensuring that happiness without them is always followed by a cost. Think of the times your happiness was met with coldness, with a fight, with a sudden crisis, and how the pattern taught you to dim your own light as a survival strategy. You do not need to dim anything tonight. Let the happiness rest, safe and unpunished, and know that the person who punished your joy was not threatened by the joy itself, but by what the joy meant, which was that you could exist fully and happily without them. The mood that controlled the house. The mood that controlled the house is the narcissist's emotional dominance, the unspoken rule that the atmosphere of the home, the emotional climate everyone lives in, is determined by the narcissist's mood and adjusted by everyone else's behavior to match it. When they are happy, the house is permitted to be happy. When they are angry, everyone walks on eggshells. When they are silent, the house is silent. The mood is the governance system, more effective than any explicit rule, because it operates through the body, through the nervous system, through the constant, exhausting attunement to another person's emotional state that the cohabitants of the narcissist perform automatically, adjusting their own behavior, their own volume, their own presence to manage the mood that manages the house. Think of how much of your energy was spent monitoring their mood, reading the signs, adjusting your behavior to prevent the escalation, and how the monitoring, which felt like sensitivity, was actually hypervigilance, the learned response of a nervous system that had been trained through experience that the mood was the law. You do not need to monitor any mood tonight. Let the house rest, your house, your mood, your climate, and know that the emotional atmosphere of your life was never supposed to be determined by one person's state, and the determining, now ended, leaves you standing in a house where the weather is, for the first time, yours to set. The emotions that were never theirs. The emotions that were never theirs is the whole of this tier gathered into a single, clarifying recognition that the emotions the narcissist displayed were almost never genuine expressions of feeling, but strategic deployments, emotions used as tools rather than experienced as truths. The rage was a punishment tool. The tears were a deflection tool. The guilt was a control tool. The tenderness was a reward tool. The silence was a fear tool. The victimhood was an escape tool. Each emotion served a function, and the function, not the feeling, was the point. This does not mean the narcissist feels nothing. They feel, but what they feel and what they display are not the same, because the display is selected for effect rather than offered for connection. And the effect, which is always your compliance, your guilt, your fear, or your caretaking, is the only reason the emotion was shown. Think of the emotions you received and how consistently they produced the response the narcissist needed, and how the consistency, which should have been suspicious, was invisible. Because emotions are the one thing we never suspect of being strategic. You do not need to decode any emotions tonight. Let them rest, deployed and retired, and know that the emotions you were shown were not windows into a soul, but tools taken from a toolkit. And the toolkit, now that you can see it, looks very different from the feelings it was imitating. The third person they brought in. The third person they brought in is triangulation, one of the narcissist's most reliable tools for creating insecurity, competition, and the constant feeling that you must perform to keep your position in the relationship. Triangulation introduces a third party, a friend, an ex, a colleague, a stranger, into the dynamic, not as an actual threat, but as a strategic presence designed to make you feel replaceable, to activate your jealousy, and to ensure that you never feel secure enough to stop trying. The narcissist does not need to cheat. They need only to mention, to compare, to make the third person visible enough that you feel the competition. And the feeling, once activated, does the rest, producing an anxiety-driven effort to be better, to be more, to be enough. An effort that gives the narcissist exactly what they need, which is a partner who is constantly auditioning for a role they already have. The third person may not even know they are being used. They are a prop, placed in the dynamic by the narcissist's words or attention, and the placing is almost always deniable, presented as innocent, as coincidental, as you being paranoid. Think of the third person and how their presence changed your behavior, how the presence made you try harder, doubt more, and hold on tighter, and how the trying and the doubting and the holding were the point. You do not need to compete with anyone tonight. Let the triangle rest, dissolved, and unnecessary, and know that the third person was never a real threat. They were a tool deployed to keep you insecure enough to stay controllable. The ex they kept too close. The ex they kept too close is a specific form of triangulation, the maintenance of a relationship with a former partner that is kept alive not because the narcissist still loves them, but because the ex's continued presence serves as a permanent reminder that you are not the only option, that the narcissist has alternatives, and that your position, which feels like love, is actually a competition you did not enter and cannot win. The ex is mentioned casually, compared to favorably, contacted openly, and the openness is the weapon, because the narcissist is not hiding the contact. They are displaying it, making sure you see it, making sure you feel it, making sure the feeling, which is insecurity, is active at all times. The ex does not need to be a real threat. They need only to exist, visibly, in the narcissist's world, and the existing, because it is never fully explained and never fully resolved, produces a permanent low-level anxiety that the narcissist uses as leverage. Think of the ex who is always present and how their presence made you feel. The specific mixture of jealousy, inadequacy, and the exhausting effort to be better than someone you should never have been compared to. You do not need to compare yourself to anyone tonight. Let the ex rest, used and probably unaware, and know that the person who kept their ex too close was not holding on to love. They were holding on to a tool, and the tool's purpose was to keep you uncertain enough to remain permanently grateful for a position that should never have felt conditional. The comparison that cut you down. The comparison that cut you down is the narcissist's habit of measuring you unfavorably against other people, other partners, other versions of what you could be, so that the measuring produces not motivation, but diminishment. Not a desire to grow, but a feeling of falling short that keeps your self-esteem permanently below the level at which you would consider leaving. The comparison is strategic. It is delivered casually, as though it were an observation rather than an attack, a simple noticing that someone else does something better, looks better, achieves more, tries harder, and the noticing, because it is presented as innocent, cannot be challenged without appearing insecure. The narcissist is not comparing to help you improve. They are comparing to keep you small, because a person who feels they measure up is a person who might measure the relationship and find it wanting. Think of the comparisons that cut you, the casual mentions of other people's qualities, the observations that were technically neutral and emotionally devastating, and how each one shaved a thin layer off your confidence, and how the shaving, over time, reduced you to someone who did not believe they could do better than the person who was cutting them down. You do not need to measure up to anything tonight. Let the comparison rest, unfair and intentional, and know that the person who compared you to others was not pointing at your deficiencies. They were manufacturing them, creating a gap between you and an imaginary standard so that the gap would keep you striving and the striving would keep you theirs. The people they sent to do their work. The people they sent to do their work are the flying monkeys, the friends, family members, and acquaintances. The narcissist recruits, consciously or unconsciously, to reinforce their message, to pressure you, to deliver their opinions through other mouths, so that the pressure feels like the consensus of your community rather than the agenda of one person. The flying monkeys do not know they are flying monkeys. They believe they are helping, intervening in a situation they have been given one side of, the narcissist's side, and the one side, which paints the narcissist as the victim and you as the problem, is convincing enough to mobilize well-meaning people against you. The flying monkeys call to check on you, meaning to check on you for them. They offer advice that echoes the narcissist's talking points. They express concern that sounds independent, but was scripted by the person who sent them. The effect is devastating because the pressure no longer comes from one person. It comes from everyone, the entire social circle aligned against you, each one delivering the same message through a different voice. And the chorus, because it sounds like everyone agrees, makes you doubt not the narcissist, but yourself. Think of the people who appeared, helpfully, to deliver messages that sounded like their own, but felt like someone else's. You do not need to sort any messengers tonight. Let the flying monkeys rest, used and unaware, and know that the consensus that formed against you was not organic. It was cultivated by a person who understood that one voice can be questioned, but many voices cannot. The story they told about you. The story they told about you is the narcissist's version of the relationship, the narrative they construct and distribute to friends, family, and anyone who will listen. A narrative in which they are the long-suffering partner, and you are the unstable, ungrateful, difficult person who drove them to their limits. The story is not a complaint. It is a campaign, a systematic, sustained effort to control the narrative so that if and when the relationship ends, the community's sympathy belongs to the narcissist and the blame belongs to you. The story is told before you know it is being told, seeded during the relationship, planted in conversations you were not part of, and by the time you discover it, the story has already taken root, and the reality, your reality, has been preempted by a version that was designed to discredit it. Think of the moment you discovered what was being said about you, and how the discovery felt like betrayal, and also like a trap, because the story had been established before you had a chance to tell your own. And the telling, when you finally attempted it, was received not as truth, but as the behavior the story had already predicted. You do not need to correct any story tonight. Let the narrative rest, told and fading, and know that the story was never about truth. It was about control. The narcissist ensuring that the social environment would support their version and dismiss yours. The reputation they destroyed quietly. The reputation they destroyed quietly is the smear campaign, the narcissist's preemptive strike against your credibility, conducted not through dramatic public accusations, but through quiet, concerned, seemingly reluctant revelations shared with carefully selected audiences. They do not say you are terrible. They say they are worried about you. They do not accuse you of abuse. They hint that you are unstable. They do not denounce you. They express sadness about you, and the sadness, because it looks like concern, is believed more readily than any accusation would be. The smear campaign is designed to ensure that when you finally speak your truth, the audience has already been primed to disbelieve it, to see your account not as honesty, but as the exact instability the narcissist warned them about. The destruction is done in whispers rather than shouts, in private conversations rather than public statements, and the privacy makes it invisible to you until the damage is complete. Think of the relationships that cooled, the friends who pulled away, the family who became distant, and how the cooling and the pulling and the distancing happened without any event you could point to. You do not need to rebuild any reputation tonight. Let the whispers rest, spoken and fading, and know that the reputation that was destroyed was not destroyed by truth, but by a narrative. And the narrative, once recognized as a strategy rather than a concern, loses its power over the people who were told it. The ally they turned against you. The ally they turned against you is the specific person, often a close friend or family member, who was systematically converted from your supporter into the narcissist's instrument. the person whose loyalty was redirected through the narcissist's narrative until the ally, who once saw you clearly, began to see you through the narcissist's lens. The conversion is gradual. The narcissist invests time in the ally, sharing confidences, expressing concern, building a relationship that gives them access to the ally's loyalty and the ally. Receiving the narcissist's version as genuine begins to shift, questioning you, doubting you, siding with the narcissist in disputes they once would have seen clearly. The loss of the ally is one of the most painful experiences in a narcissistic relationship because the ally was someone you trusted, someone who knew you, and the turning of that person against you feels like a betrayal from two directions at once: the narcissist who engineered it and the ally who fell for it. Think of the ally you lost and how the losing felt like your fault, and how the fault was the narcissist's engineering. The careful, patient conversion of your support into their weapon. You do not need to win any ally back tonight. Let the turned rest, and know that the person who was turned was not weak. They were played, given a convincing narrative by a convincing performer, and the performing was too skilled for most people to see through. The praise they gave to everyone but you. The praise they gave to everyone but you is the narcissist's strategic withholding of validation from the one person who needs it most, combined with the visible, generous dispensing of praise to everyone else, so that you are left watching the narcissist be warm, generous, and affirming to the world while being critical, distant, and withholding to you. The public generosity is the performance. The private withholding is the reality. And the contrast between the two produces a specific, agonizing pain. The pain of watching the person who should love you most love everyone else more visibly, more warmly, more genuinely than they love you. The withholding is deliberate. It keeps your self-worth dependent on a validation that never fully arrives, keeping you in the seeking position, always trying to earn what the narcissist gives freely to strangers. Think of watching them be charming, warm, and praising to others, and how the watching felt like a judgment, as though their generosity to everyone else was a commentary on your inadequacy. You do not need to earn any praise tonight. Let the withholding rest, and know that the praise given to everyone but you was not a reflection of your worth, but a tactic for managing it. The narcissist, keeping your self-esteem on a leash by feeding everyone else in front of you. The flirtation that was a message to you. The flirtation that was a message to you is the narcissist's use of visible flirtation with others as a form of communication. The flirting aimed not at the person being flirted with, but at you, the person watching, designed to remind you of your replaceability, to activate your jealousy, and to keep you in the competitive state the narcissist needs. The flirtation is done in your presence, often directly in front of you, with enough plausible deniability that confronting it makes you look possessive rather than perceptive. They are just being friendly. They are just naturally charming. You are just reading too much into it. And the just, repeated each time, makes the pattern invisible while the message remains clear, which is that their attention, their warmth, their interest is available to anyone, and your exclusive claim to it is an illusion you maintain at the narcissist's discretion. Think of the flirtation that was performed in your sight, and how the seeing was the purpose, and how the purpose was delivered with enough deniability that addressing it made you the problem. You do not need to watch anyone tonight. Let the flirtation rest, and know that the charming behavior you witnessed was not spontaneous but directed, aimed at you through someone else, using the someone else as a screen on which the message of your expendability was projected. The community that believed their version, The community that believe their version is the social environment the narcissist has shaped, the circle of people who have received the narcissist's narrative and accepted it, forming a community of belief that supports the narcissist's version of events and that treats your version as unreliable, exaggerated, or evidence of the instability the narcissist warned them about. The community does not know it has been shaped. Each person believes they are forming an independent opinion, unaware that the opinion was seeded by the narcissist's careful, consistent, compassionate-sounding campaign. The community's belief is the narcissist's insurance policy, the guarantee that even if the relationship ends, the social consequences fall on you rather than on them. Think of the community that believed their version and how the believing felt like a wall, a unanimous judgment that your experience was not real, your pain was not valid, and your account was not credible, and how the unanimity was manufactured by one person and accepted by many. You do not need to convince any community tonight. Let the believing rest, shaped and dissolving, and know that the community's consensus was not evidence, but a construction. And the construction, once you see it, reveals not your isolation, but the narcissist's investment in ensuring that if anyone was going to be believed, it was going to be them. They played the hero to everyone else. They played the hero to everyone else. And this is one of the most confusing aspects of narcissistic relationships, the discovery that the person who is cruel to you in private is charming, generous, and admired in public. The person everyone else thinks is wonderful. The person whose public face is so convincing that your private experience seems impossible. The hero performance is not accidental. It is the narcissist's public persona, the mask that ensures community support, social capital, and the plausible deniability that makes your account of their behavior sound unbelievable. He is so kind, everyone says. She is so generous. They cannot imagine the private version, because the public version was designed to make the private version invisible. The contrast between the public hero and the private abuser is the narcissist's most effective protection, because anyone who questions them must first overcome the wall of positive impression the narcissist has built in every room they have ever entered. Think of how impossible it felt to tell someone what was happening, and how the impossibility came not from your inability to speak, but from the audience's inability to believe, because the narcissist they knew was too good, too kind, too generous to be the person you were describing. You do not need to convince anyone tonight. Let the hero rest, performed and hollow, and know that the person everyone else loved was a performance. And the performance, however convincing, was never the person. The isolation that looked like your choice. The isolation that looked like your choice is the end result of every game in this tier. The moment you realize you are alone, disconnected from friends, from family, from the community that once supported you, and the disconnection, which feels like something that happened to you, was actually engineered, step by step, game by game, through the triangulation, the smear campaigns, the flying monkeys, the turned allies, and the hero performance, until the isolation was complete, and the completeness was the narcissist's achievement. The isolation does not feel engineered. It feels like your life simply narrowed, like people drifted away, like circumstances changed, and the feeling of natural drift disguises the deliberate engineering. The narcissist's patient, systematic removal of every support that would have given you the perspective to see what was happening. Think of how gradually you became alone, and how each step in the isolation seemed unrelated to the narcissist, and how the seeming was the strategy, each step disguised as coincidence, as your decision, as just how things worked out. You do not need to reconnect with anyone tonight. Let the isolation rest, engineered an ending, and know that the aloneness was built, brick by someone who needed you alone. Because a person who is alone has no one to reality check the narcissist's version, and the version, unchecked, becomes the only reality available. The army you did not know they had. The army you did not know they had is the whole of this tier gathered into a single, sobering recognition that the narcissist was never operating alone. They had a network, a system of people, relationships, and narratives that functioned as an army of control, each soldier unaware they were a soldier, each instrument unaware they were being played, each ally believing they were acting independently when they were acting on programming the narcissist had installed. The triangulation partners, the flying monkeys, the smear campaign recipients, the turned allies, the hero-worshipping community, all of them were part of a system that surrounded you, that reinforced the narcissist's version, that made your isolation look like your failure, and the narcissist's cruelty look like your imagination. The army was invisible because each member appeared independently, and the independence, which was the illusion, disguised the coordination, which was the reality. Think of all the people who were involved in the dynamic, and how none of them knew they were involved, and how the not knowing was the narcissist's most impressive achievement, the ability to orchestrate a campaign through people who did not know they were being orchestrated. You do not need to disband any army tonight. Let the soldiers rest, demobilized and waking up, and know that the army was never yours to fight. It was the narcissist's creation, and the creation, once you leave the system, loses its general and dissolves into the individual people it always was. Each one, eventually, slowly, beginning to see what they were part of. You stopped recognizing yourself. You stopped recognizing yourself. And this is the moment that defines the deepest damage of a narcissistic relationship. The moment you caught a glimpse of who you had become and did not recognize the person looking back. The person before the relationship had opinions, had friends, had interests, energy, laughter, a way of moving through the world that was distinctly, recognizably theirs. The person inside the relationship is someone else, someone quieter, someone smaller, someone whose primary skill is managing another person's mood and whose primary identity is defined by what that other person needs. The transformation did not happen in a single event. It happened incrementally, one small adjustment at a time, each one reasonable, each one survivable. And the total, viewed from outside, devastating. The person you became was not who you are. It was who you needed to be to survive the relationship, a survival adaptation so complete it overwrote the original. And the original, buried beneath the adaptation, seemed to disappear. Think of the moment you did not recognize yourself, the moment you heard yourself say something you would never have said, or tolerate something you would never have tolerated, and how the not recognizing was not a sudden shock, but a slow realization, the gradual dawning that the person you were looking at was a stranger wearing your face. You do not need to find yourself tonight. Let the stranger rest, and know that the person you became in the relationship was not who you are, but who the relationship required. And the requiring, now ended, has released you back to the project of finding the person who was there before. The eggshells you walked on every day. The eggshells you walked on every day are the constant, exhausting hypervigilance that becomes the normal state of a person living with a narcissist. The perpetual monitoring of tone, word choice, facial expression, and behavior to avoid triggering the unpredictable rage, the silent treatment, the emotional withdrawal, or whatever consequence the narcissist deploys when they are displeased. Walking on eggshells is not caution. It is a survival strategy, the learned response of a nervous system that has been conditioned to treat the narcissist's mood as a potential threat and to devote continuous resources to managing it. The walking does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks like a person being careful, being considerate, being attentive, and the looking, because it resembles positive relationship behavior, disguises the fear that is driving it. The careful person is not being careful because they are loving. They are being careful because they are afraid. And the fear, which never fully subsides, produces an exhaustion that no amount of rest can address, because the threat is not physical. It is atmospheric, and the atmosphere never changes. Think of the eggshells and how you learned to walk on them, and how the walking became so automatic you forgot what it felt like to move freely. You do not need to walk carefully tonight. Let the eggshells rest, crushed and cleared, and know that the exhaustion you carried was the cost of constant vigilance. And the vigilance, now that the source of the danger is gone, can finally, slowly, stand down. The pleasing that replaced your personality. The pleasing that replaced your personality is the gradual substitution of your authentic self with a performing self. The version of you that was built not from your own nature but from the narcissist's requirements, assembled piece by piece from what pleased them and what did not, until the performing became the default and the authentic became the memory. The pleasing is not a choice. It is a survival adaptation, the result of learning, through repeated experience, that your real self produces negative consequences and your performing self produces positive ones. And the learning, reinforced daily, trains you to perform automatically, to scan each moment for what the narcissist needs and to deliver it before the need becomes a demand. The person-pleasing replaces preferences with accommodations, opinions with agreements, desires with whatever the narcissist desires, and the replacing is so thorough that the person, after months or years, cannot distinguish between what they actually want and what they have learned to want, because wanting it keeps the peace. Think of the preferences you lost, the opinions you surrendered, and how the surrendering felt like growth when it was actually erosion. You do not need to please anyone tonight. Let the performing rest, and know that the personality that was replaced is not gone. It is buried, preserved beneath the adaptation, and the adaptation no longer needed can be gently, slowly removed, revealing the person who is always there, waiting under the performance for the safety to come back out. The interests you quietly abandoned. The interests you quietly abandoned are the hobbies, passions, pursuits, and pleasures that you stopped engaging with during the relationship, not because the narcissist explicitly forbade them, but because the cost of pursuing them, the commentary, the sulking, the guilt, the manufactured crisis that always coincided with your enjoyment, made the pursuing too expensive. The narcissist did not take your interests. They made your interests uncomfortable, surrounding each one with enough friction that you chose voluntarily to stop. And the choosing, because it was technically your choice, could not be called control. The interests died quietly, one by one, each departure unremarked, each loss too small to mourn individually, and the total, the complete loss of everything that made you feel alive outside the relationship was the sum of 100 small, apparently voluntary decisions that were shaped entirely by the narcissist's resistance to your independent enjoyment. Think of the things that once made you come alive and when you stopped doing them, and how the stopping coincided with the relationship, and how the coinciding was not coincidence, but causation. You do not need to pursue any interest tonight. Let the abandoned rest, and know that the interests you lost were not outgrown. They were made too costly to maintain, and the cost, invisible and deniable, was the narcissist's most efficient method of ensuring that your joy came only from them. The confidence they slowly drained. The confidence they slowly drained is the reduction of your self-belief through a process so gradual it was invisible. The daily, hourly, moment-by-moment erosion of your trust in your own competence, your own judgment, your own worth, performed not through dramatic attacks, but through the accumulation of small signals that said, consistently and persistently, you are not quite enough. The draining is done through micro-expressions of disappointment, through corrections delivered as help, through the subtle suggestion that your decisions need their oversight, through the comparison to others who are doing better, through the withholding of praise for things that deserve praising, and through the thousand invisible ways a person can communicate inadequacy without ever saying the word. The confidence that was there before the relationship, the quiet, unexamined belief in your own ability to navigate the world, is systematically reduced until the person who once trusted themselves defers to the narcissist on everything. Not because the narcissist is smarter, but because the person no longer believes they are smart enough. Think of the confidence you had before and the confidence you had during, and how the gap was filled not with events, but with atmosphere. You do not need to be confident about anything tonight. Let the drained rest, and know that the confidence was not lost because you became less capable. It was taken, deliberately and patiently, by someone who needed you unsure enough to stay dependent. The boundaries that were worn away. The boundaries that were worn away are the limits you once held, the lines you once drew, the standards you once maintained that were eroded by the narcissist's persistent, patient testing. Each test a small push against the boundary, each push producing either compliance or conflict. And the compliance, because it was easier, was chosen more often than the conflict. And the choosing, repeated, moved the boundary further and further from where it started until the boundary no longer existed. The narcissist does not respect boundaries. They test them the way water tests a dam, constantly, looking for the weakness. And the weakness, when found, is exploited, not dramatically but persistently, the push repeated until the boundary gives. The person whose boundaries were worn away did not abandon them. They were outweighted, outpersisted, outpatienced by someone whose commitment to eroding the boundary was greater than their energy to maintain it. Think of the boundaries you set that did not hold, and how the not holding was not weakness, but exhaustion. The natural result of defending a line that someone was testing 24 hours a day. You do not need to hold any line tonight. Let the boundaries rest, worn and rebuilding, and know that the boundaries that were lost can be rebuilt. Not with the same energy that maintained them before, but with the new energy that comes from understanding why they fell. The voice that got smaller and smaller. The voice that got smaller and smaller is the progressive silencing of your self-expression, the gradual reduction of what you say, how loudly you say it, and whether you say it at all, produced by the accumulated experience that speaking up, having an opinion, expressing a need, or saying no leads to consequences that the speaking is not worth. The voice does not go silent in one moment. It diminishes over time, each correction reducing the volume a little, each dismissal reducing the content a little, each consequence reducing the willingness a little, until the person who once spoke freely is the person who asks permission to think, who monitors their own expression before it leaves their mouth, who has become their own censor. The narcissist's work internalize so completely that the external control is no longer necessary. Think of how your voice changed, how the things you used to say without thinking became things you said with calculation, and how the calculation became avoidance, and the avoidance became silence. You do not need to speak tonight. Let the small voice rest, and know that the voice was not naturally small. It was made small, reduced by a person who needed your silence. And the silence, learned and adopted, is not permanent. The voice can grow again. It grows by speaking. And the speaking, which feels dangerous, is the act that rebuilds what the silence destroyed. You began to see yourself through them. You began to see yourself through their eyes. And this is one of the most insidious effects of narcissistic relationships, the moment your self-perception was replaced by their perception of you. The moment you stopped evaluating yourself from the inside and started evaluating yourself from the outside, through a lens that was designed to keep you small. The narcissist's view of you became your view of you. Their criticism became your inner voice. Their disappointment became your self-assessment. Their evaluation, which was never about your actual qualities, but about their need to manage your self-worth, was adopted as your own. And the adoption was so complete that you could no longer tell the difference between your own voice and theirs. Think of how you see yourself now, and how much of that seeing was installed by a person who needed you to see yourself a certain way, and how the certain way was always small enough to keep you from leaving, damaged enough to keep you grateful, and insufficient enough to keep you striving. You do not need to see yourself through anyone's eyes tonight. Let the borrowed vision rest, and know that the self you see when you look through their lens is not the self that exists. It is the self they needed you to see, and the seeing, now that you know it was installed, can be replaced with your own eyes, which have always been more accurate and more kind. The standards you dropped without noticing. The standards you dropped without noticing are the values, the expectations, and the minimum requirements for how you would be treated that you held before the relationship and that were lowered gradually, so gradually, that each lowering felt like a natural adjustment rather than a surrender. You once would not have tolerated being spoken to that way. Now you do. You once would not have accepted that kind of behavior. Now you barely notice it. You once had a clear picture of what a loving relationship looked like. Now the picture has been blurred, adjusted, redrawn so many times that the original is unrecognizable. The dropping of standards is the narcissist's most important long-term achievement, because a person with high standards is a person who will leave, and the lowering, done slowly enough, prevents the leaving by preventing the recognition that the leaving is warranted. Think of the standards you held before and the standards you hold now, and how the gap between them is the measure of the narcissist's influence on your self-worth. You do not need to raise any standards tonight. Let them rest, lowered and recoverable, and know that the standards you dropped were not dropped because you became less deserving. They were lowered by someone who needed your bar low enough that their behavior could pass over it. The exhaustion of being someone else. The exhaustion of being someone else is the specific, recognizable tiredness that comes from performing a version of yourself that was designed for someone else's benefit. The fatigue of maintaining a persona that was built not from your nature but from the narcissist's requirements. The exhaustion is not physical. It is existential. The deep weariness of a self that has been suppressed for so long that the suppressing has become the primary activity of the psyche, consuming energy that should have gone to living, to creating, to enjoying, and spending it. Instead, on the endless work of managing another person's needs while neglecting your own. Think of how tired you were during the relationship, not the tiredness of a busy life, but the tiredness of a false one, the weariness of someone who has been performing a role they did not audition for, on a stage they did not choose, in a play that never ends. You do not need to perform tonight. Let the exhaustion rest, and know that the tiredness you carried was not the tiredness of living too much. It was the tiredness of living too little. The energy spent on being someone else, leaving nothing for the work of being. The mirror that showed a stranger. The mirror that showed a stranger is the moment of recognition. The moment you looked at your reflection, your literal or metaphorical reflection, and did not recognize the person looking back. The stranger in the mirror is not you. It is the adaptation, the survival version, the person-pleasing, eggshell-walking, voice-diminishing, standard-dropping version that was built to survive the narcissist. And the building, because it was gradual, was invisible until this moment. The moment the stranger's face became undeniable. The recognition is painful, but it is also the beginning. Because the person who can see the stranger can also remember the original. And the remembering, however faint, is the thread that leads back to the self that was buried. Think of the moment you saw the stranger and how the seeing was both the worst and the best moment. The worst because of what it revealed, and the best because the revealing meant the seeing had begun, and the seeing, once begun, cannot be unseen. You do not need to look in any mirror tonight. Let the stranger rest, fading as the original returns, and know that the stranger was never you. It was a costume, built for survival, worn for necessity, and the removing of it, which begins with the seeing, is the first step toward the person who is always underneath, the person they needed you to be. The person they needed you to be was not a person but a function, a role designed to serve the narcissist's needs, a shape they required you to fill. And the filling, which felt like love, was actually the erasure of everything about you that did not fit the shape. They needed you admiring. They needed you available. They needed you compliant. They needed you smaller than them, less confident, less competent, less threatening, less yourself. And you, shaped by the love bombing, the gaslighting, the criticism, the intermittent reinforcement, the isolation, and the eggshells, became exactly what they needed. Not because you were weak, but because the system was designed over months or years to produce exactly this result. Think of the role you played and how completely you filled it, and how the filling felt like being loved when it was actually being used. You do not need to fill any role tonight. Let the function rest, served and finished, and know that the person they needed you to be was their creation, not yours. And the creating, however thorough, never touched the person underneath. The one who existed before the role was assigned, and who exists now. Beneath the role, ready to be discovered. The self that was buried, not destroyed, is the whole of this tier gathered into a single, hopeful truth, that everything that was erased, diminished, silenced, and replaced was not destroyed. It was buried, placed under layers of adaptation and survival, and the burying, while it made the self inaccessible, did not make it non-existent. The interests are still there. The confidence is still there. The voice is still there. The boundaries are still there. The person you were before the relationship, the person with opinions and preferences and a way of moving through the world that was distinctly, recognizably theirs, is still there. Beneath the stranger, beneath the performer, beneath the person pleaser, waiting for the safety to emerge. The self was buried the way a seed is buried, not eliminated, but placed in darkness. And the darkness, which felt like an ending, was actually a preservation. the self kept safe in the only place the narcissist could not reach, which was deep enough inside you that even they, with all their access, could not find it. Think of who you were before and feel the thread of that person still present, faint, but real, waiting. You do not need to dig anything up tonight. Let the buried self rest, preserved and patient, and know that the most important thing the narcissist never knew is that the person they spent years erasing was never erased, only hidden. And the hiding, which felt like a loss, was actually the deepest, most instinctive act of self-preservation you ever performed. The cycle that kept repeating. The cycle that kept repeating is the idealized devalue discard cycle, the signature pattern of narcissistic relationships, the predictable, repeating sequence in which the narcissist first adores you, then diminishes you, then abandons you, and then, just when you have begun to recover, returns to adore you again, restarting the cycle from the beginning. The cycle is not random. It is structural, built into the narcissist's relational pattern, and the pattern repeats because the narcissist's needs, not yours, drive the timing. The idealization phase serves their need for a perfect source of admiration. The devaluation phase serves their need to discharge the contempt that builds when the source becomes too familiar. The discard phase serves their need to prove they are not dependent. And the return, the hoovering, serves their need for the source they discarded when the replacement fails to provide what you provided. The cycle creates a specific kind of suffering, the suffering of a person living in perpetual uncertainty, never knowing which phase they are in, whether the love is real this time, whether the cruelty will return, whether the leaving is permanent. Think of the cycle and how many times it repeated, and how each repetition taught you not to trust the good and not to despair in the bad, because both were temporary, and the temporary, which should have been the warning, became instead the hope, the belief that if the bad was temporary, the good might last next time. You do not need to track any cycle tonight. Let the repetition rest, and know that the cycle was never about your behavior. It was about their pattern. And the pattern, once you step outside it, loses its power to repeat. The idealization that hooked you back. The idealization that hooked you back is the return of the golden version, the re-emergence of the person you fell in love with, the one who mirrors you, who adores you, who makes you feel like the only person in the world, arriving just when you had begun to accept that this person was gone, proving, with devastating effectiveness, that they were not gone, but only hidden. And the proving, because it feels like proof that the real person was in there all along, is enough to pull you back into a cycle you had almost escaped. The idealization phase of the return is always the most intense, because the narcissist, sensing the supply is slipping, invests more heavily in the performance, producing a version of themselves that is more attentive, more loving, more perfect than even the original beginning, and the perfection, because it matches what you most want to believe, overwhelms the evidence of what you most need to remember. The return hooks you because it confirms the hope you never fully released, the hope that the cruel version was temporary and the loving version was real. And the hope, reactivated, is stronger than any amount of evidence, because hope does not run on evidence. It runs on need. Think of the return and how it felt like the answer, the proof that you were right to stay, that the love was real, that the bad was over, and how the feeling, so exactly like the beginning, was the beginning, another turn of the same wheel. You do not need to hope for any return tonight. Let the idealization rest, and know that the golden version that returned was not the real person making amends. It was the cycle making its turn. The devaluation you learned to survive. The devaluation you learned to survive is the phase in which the narcissist's behavior shifts from adoration to contempt, from warmth to coldness, from seeing you as perfect to seeing you as worthless. And the shift, which happens without any change in your behavior, produces a confusion so disorienting that the person experiencing it searches desperately for what they did wrong, when the answer is nothing, because the devaluation is not caused by your behavior, but by the narcissist's internal cycle. The devaluation phase is where most of the damage occurs, where the criticism sharpens, the gaslighting intensifies, the silent treatment lengthens, and the person who once made you feel like the center of the universe makes you feel like an inconvenience at the edge of it. The surviving is what you learn, the specific, adaptive, exhausting skill of enduring the devaluation while maintaining enough self to function. And the skill, once learned, becomes permanent. The body remembering how to shrink, how to accommodate, how to absorb contempt without shattering long after the relationship has ended. Think of how you learned to survive the bad phases, and how the learning was a kind of expertise, the expertise of endurance, and how the expertise, which kept you alive in the relationship, was also the thing that kept you in it. You do not need to survive anything tonight. Let the endurance rest, skilled and exhausted, and know that the ability to survive the devaluation was not weakness. It was strength, deployed in service of a bond that did not deserve the strength it demanded. The discard that came without warning. The discard that came without warning is the moment the narcissist drops you, suddenly, completely, without explanation, without transition, without any of the closure that a genuine ending would provide. The discard is not a breakup. It is a disposal. The narcissist discarding you the way a person discards something that has stopped serving its purpose, and the disposal, because it is total and immediate, produces a shock that no ordinary breakup produces. The specific, devastating shock of being treated as an object whose usefulness has expired. The discard is not always permanent. Often it is strategic, a punishment designed to produce maximum pain and maximum anxiety, so that the return, when it comes, finds you desperate enough to accept any terms. But the discard, even when you suspect it is temporary, produces a genuine terror, because the experience of being dropped so completely, with so little regard, activates the primal fear of abandonment at its most raw. And the activation, because it is primal, bypasses every rational understanding and lands directly in the body as panic. Think of the moment you were discarded and how the moment felt, not like the end of a relationship, but like the end of existence, and how the magnitude of the feeling was the measure of how deeply the bond had been installed. You do not need to brace for any discard tonight. Let the terror rest, and know that the discard was never about your value. It was about the narcissist's cycle, the mechanical disposal of a source that had served its turn, and the disposal, however devastating, said nothing about you and everything about them. The hoovering that pulled you back in. The hoovering that pulled you back in is named after the vacuum cleaner, the narcissist's ability to suck you back into the relationship after you have left or been discarded, using whatever tactic is most effective: love, promises, threats, pity, the sudden appearance of the person you fell in love with, the apology you have been waiting for, the change you have been begging for. All of it deployed, not because it is genuine, but because the narcissist needs the supply back. The hoovering is time to your recovery. The narcissist does not return when you are at your strongest. They return when you are at your most vulnerable, when the grief has lowered your defenses, when the loneliness has made you question your decision, when the hope, which you thought you had extinguished, has begun to glow again in the dark. The timing is instinctive. The narcissist can sense the moment when the pull of the old bond is strongest, and they arrive at that moment, not with the version of themselves that made you leave, but with the version that made you stay, and the version, because it is exactly what you need, is almost impossible to resist. Think of the times you were pulled back, and how the pulling happened at the exact moment you were most susceptible, and how the exactness was the strategy. You do not need to resist any pull tonight. Let the hoovering rest, and know that the return was never about love. It was about supply. And the supply, once you understand the dynamic, can finally be withheld. The trauma bond that felt like love. The trauma bond that felt like love is the attachment that forms not through genuine connection, but through the cycle of intermittent abuse and intermittent kindness. The specific, powerful, biochemically reinforced bond that keeps a person attached to someone who is harming them. The trauma bond is not a choice. It is a neurological event, the brain's response to intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The unpredictable alternation of reward and punishment, producing a bond that is stronger, not weaker, than what consistent treatment would create. The bond feels like love because the brain uses the same chemicals, the same neural pathways, the same emotional intensity, and the feeling, because it is biochemically identical to love, is indistinguishable from it from the inside. The person trauma bonded to a narcissist is not in love. They are in a neurological state that mimics love so perfectly that no amount of rational understanding can override the feeling. Think of the attachment you felt and how impossible it was to break, and how the impossibility was not a measure of the love's depth, but a measure of the bond's strength. And the strength was produced not by the connection, but by the cycling, the alternation, the unpredictable giving and taking away. You do not need to break any bond tonight. Let the attachment rest, biochemical and loosening, and know that the bond that felt unbreakable was not built from love, but from a pattern. And the pattern, once it stops being fed, gradually, slowly, eventually releases its hold. The addiction to the person who hurt you. The addiction to the person who hurt you is the trauma bond described in its most honest terms. The recognition that the attachment to the narcissist operates with the same mechanics as any addiction. The craving, the withdrawal, the obsessive thinking, the return to the source. Despite knowing the source is harmful, all of it driven by the brain's reward system, hijacked by the intermittent reinforcement, producing a dependency that is as real and as physiological as any substance dependency. The addiction is not metaphorical. The brain of a person in a trauma bond shows patterns similar to the brain of a person in withdrawal. The same areas activated, the same desperate seeking of the stimulus, the same inability of the rational mind to override the craving. The person who cannot leave the narcissist is not weak-willed. They are addicted, their reward system hijacked by a cycle that was designed, whether consciously or instinctively, to produce exactly this effect. Think of the craving and how it felt in the body, the physical pull toward the person you knew was harmful, and how the pull was not a character flaw, but a neurological event. Your brain seeking the stimulus it had been conditioned to need. You do not need to overcome any craving tonight. Let the addiction rest, and know that the inability to leave was never about your strength. It was about the bond's chemistry, and the chemistry, deprived of the cycle that feeds it, will eventually, slowly, return to normal. The hope that kept you trapped. The hope that kept you trapped is the most painful truth about why people stay in narcissistic relationships. The quiet, persistent, unextinguishable belief that the person you fell in love with, the golden version, the one who mirrored you and adored you and made you feel chosen, is still in there somewhere, hidden behind the cruelty, and that if you love hard enough, long enough, patiently enough, the real person will return and the nightmare will end. The hope is the cruelest trap because it uses your own love against you, taking the most generous, most compassionate, most forgiving part of your nature and turning it into the chain that keeps you in place. The hope is not irrational. It is built on evidence. The evidence of the golden periods, the returns, the moments when the narcissist is exactly the person you fell in love with. And the moments, because they are real, feed the hope. And the hope, because it is fed, does not die. Think of the hope you carried and how it felt like loyalty, like faith, like the noblest part of your love, and how the noblest part was the chain, and the chain was forged from your own goodness. You do not need to hope for anyone tonight. Let the hope rest and know that the hope was not wrong. The person you hope for was never real, and the hope, misdirected at a performance, can be redirected at yourself, where it has always belonged. Why you could not just leave. Why you could not just leave is the question that everyone on the outside asks and that no one on the outside can understand. Because the leaving, which looks so simple from the outside, is the most complicated thing a trauma-bonded person can attempt. You could not leave because the bond was neurological. You could not leave because the gaslighting had destroyed your trust in your own judgment. You could not leave because the isolation had removed your support network. You could not leave because the financial control had removed your independence. You could not leave because the hope kept whispering that this time it would be different. You could not leave because every time you tried, the hoovering pulled you back. You could not leave because the person who hurt you was also the person who comforted you. And the brain, unable to process the contradiction, chose the comfort over the evidence. The question, why did you stay, is the wrong question. The right question is, how did the system keep you? And the answer is, everything this video has been describing. A comprehensive, interlocking, self-reinforcing system of control that was designed, from the very first love bomb, to make leaving as difficult as possible. Think of the times you tried to leave and could not, and let the could not be what it was. Not weakness, but the system working as designed. You do not need to leave anything tonight. Let the staying rest, and know that the inability to leave was the system's greatest achievement, and the leaving, when it finally happened, was yours. The shame of staying too long. The shame of staying too long is the feeling that accompanies the leaving, the self-blame, the embarrassment, the quiet, persistent belief that you should have known sooner, should have left sooner, should have been stronger, smarter, less forgiving, more self-respecting. The shame is the narcissist's final gift, the internalized judgment that continues the narcissist's work after the narcissist is gone. The inner voice that says, you stayed because something is wrong with you, when the truth is, you stayed because the system was designed to keep you, and the design was very, very good. The shame is not yours. It belongs to the system, to the person who built the system, and the carrying of it after the leaving is the last piece of the narcissist's control still operating inside you. Think of the shame you carry about the staying, and consider that the shame is misplaced, directed at yourself, when it should be directed at the engineering, the sophisticated, multi-layered, self-reinforcing system that was built around you while you were being told it was love. You do not need to carry any shame tonight. Let it rest, misplaced and fading, and know that the person who stayed too long stayed because the leaving was made almost impossible by someone who was very skilled at making it so. And the staying, which feels like your failure, was actually their design. The leaving that happened many times. The leaving that happened many times is the pattern of departures and returns that characterizes the ending of most narcissistic relationships, the multiple attempts to leave, each one followed by a return, each return followed by another period of suffering, each period of suffering followed by another attempt to leave. The pattern is not indecision. It is the trauma bond in its death throes, the attachment weakening with each departure but not yet weak enough to break, the system losing its grip but not yet lost its grip, and the person caught between the pull of the bond and the push of the pain, oscillating between leaving and returning, until, finally, one departure is the last one. The multiple leavings are not failures. They are the process, the incremental weakening of a bond that cannot be broken in one clean cut, because the bond is not rational and does not respond to rational decisions. Each leaving weakens it. Each return teaches you something. And the learning, accumulated over multiple cycles, eventually produces the leaving that holds. Think of the times you left and returned, and how each return felt like failure, and each leaving felt like defeat, and how the whole process, viewed from the end, was not a series of failures, but a gradual accumulation of the strength that would eventually produce the final departure. You do not need to leave anything tonight. Let the pattern rest, completed and done, and know that the leaving that finally held was built from every leaving that did not, each one a practice run for the departure that would, at last, be permanent. The bond that finally could not hold. The bond that finally could not hold is the whole of this tear gathered into a single, quiet moment of liberation. The moment the trauma bond, weakened by repeated leavings, weakened by the slow return of self-trust, weakened by the accumulation of evidence that the cycle would never end, finally released its hold, and the person who had been trapped stepped out of the cycle and into the terrifying, beautiful, empty space of their own freedom. The bond did not break dramatically. It loosened, gradually, like a knot that has been worked at for months, each small loosening invisible but cumulative, until the knot, which once held everything in place, simply fell open, and the person it was holding was free. The freedom does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like falling, like the loss of the only structure you knew, the absence of the cycle producing an emptiness that the cycle, for all its cruelty, never contained. But the emptiness is not nothing. It is space. The first open space you have had in months or years. The first room without walls. The first day without eggshells. The first breath without monitoring. Think of the moment the bond released, and how the releasing felt like loss and freedom at the same time, and how both were real. You do not need to hold on to anything tonight. Let the bond rest, released and dissolved, and know that the freedom, which feels so empty now, will fill, slowly, with the life the cycle was preventing, and the life, which is yours, has been waiting all this time for the cage to open. Now you see the whole game. Now you see the whole game, and the seeing, which has been building through 100 topics, is complete. The entire architecture of the narcissistic relationship laid bare, from the charm that was the trap to the cycle you could not escape. every tactic named, every mechanism explained, every mind game placed in the light where it can no longer operate invisibly. The game depended on your not seeing it. Every tactic worked because it was hidden, disguised as love, as caring, as concern, as your fault. And the disguising was so thorough that the game, while it was being played, was invisible. The way a magic trick is invisible from the audience's perspective and obvious from the magician's. Now you are standing behind the magician. Now you can see the pulleys and the mirrors and the misdirection, and the seeing does not undo the past, does not erase the pain, does not return the years, but it does something the past could not do, which is give you clarity, the specific, detailed, unchallengeable understanding of what happened to you and how it was done. The clarity is not a cure. It is the foundation for one, because a person who understands the game cannot be played the same way again. And the understanding, which feels like knowledge, is actually protection. The first real protection you have had since the game began. Think of how long you lived inside the game without seeing it, and how the seeing, now, changes everything without changing anything. The past the same, but the understanding of it transformed. You do not need to see any more tonight. Let the game rest, fully revealed, and know that the seeing is the freedom. And the freedom, once gained, cannot be taken back. The clarity that comes after. The clarity that comes after is the strange, painful, liberating experience of looking back at the relationship from outside it and seeing, for the first time, what was actually happening. The patterns that were invisible from inside becoming obvious from outside. The tactics that were undetectable while you were in them becoming unmistakable once you have left. The clarity is not immediate. It comes in waves, each wave bringing a new recognition, a new understanding, a new moment of, oh, that is what that was. And the moments, accumulated, produce a picture so clear and so comprehensive that the picture itself is almost harder to bear than the experience, because the picture shows you the totality of what was done to you, and the totality, seen whole, is staggering. The clarity can feel like a second trauma, the pain of understanding added to the pain of experiencing, but it is also the thing that frees you. Because the person who understands what happened is the person who can stop blaming themselves for it. And the stopping of the self-blame is the beginning of the healing. Think of the moments of clarity that arrived after you left. The sudden, sharp recognitions that arrived without warning and changed your understanding of something you had been carrying for years. You do not need any more clarity tonight. Let the understanding rest, arrived, and arriving. And know that the clarity, however painful, is the mind's way of processing what it could not process while it was happening. And the processing, which feels like reopening a wound, is actually the wound's first real chance to close. The grief for what was never real. The grief for what was never real is the specific, agonizing mourning that follows the understanding that the relationship you were in, the love you believed in, the person you fell for, was not what you thought it was. You are not grieving a lost love. You are grieving a performance, a construction, a carefully designed experience that was never what it appeared to be. And the grieving, because the thing being grieved was never real, has no clear object, no specific loss to mourn, only the vast, shapeless absence of something that was always an absence, disguised as a presence. The grief is real, even though the love was not, because your experience was real, your feelings were real, your investment was real, and the discovery that the object of all that reality was an illusion does not reduce the grief. It compounds it, because you are grieving not only what you lost, but what you never had. And the never having, once you see it clearly, is harder to mourn than any genuine loss, because a genuine loss had a genuine thing to lose. Think of the grief you carry for the relationship, and consider that the grief may be for the hope rather than the person, for the version that was performed rather than the version that existed, and how the grieving, however long it takes, is the healthy process of a mind that is letting go of an illusion it needed to survive. You do not need to grieve tonight. Let the mourning rest, and know that the grief for what was never real is one of the hardest and most necessary griefs a person can face, and the facing, however slow, is the only way. The anger you are finally allowed. The anger you are finally allowed is the emotion that was suppressed throughout the entire relationship. The fury that was swallowed every time you were gaslighted, silenced, diminished, controlled, discarded, and blamed for your own pain. The anger was there. It was always there. But the expressing of it was too dangerous, because anger, in the narcissistic relationship, was the narcissist's property. And your anger, when it appeared, was treated as evidence of your instability, your irrationality, your too-muchness, and the treating taught you to swallow it, to turn it inward, to convert it into self-blame, rather than risk the consequences of expressing it outward. The anger you are finally allowed is the anger that belonged to every moment of the abuse, released now that the person who punished its expression is no longer there to punish it. The anger is not a problem. It is a signal, the healthy, appropriate, long overdue response to being treated badly by someone who should have treated you well. Think of the anger you swallowed, and how the swallowing poisoned you from the inside, and how the anger, now that it is safe to feel, may feel unfamiliar, excessive, frightening, because you were taught that your anger was dangerous when it was actually the most appropriate emotion you ever had. You do not need to be angry tonight. Let the anger rest, permitted and present, and know that the fury you carry is not a sign of damage. It is a sign of health, the healthy protest of a self that was mistreated and that finally, safely, has the right to say so. The self that is coming back. The self that is coming back is the person you were before the relationship, the one with opinions and interests and laughter and boundaries and a voice, emerging slowly from beneath the adaptation, the performance, the people-pleasing, the eggshell walking, the smaller version that the narcissist required. The coming back is not instant. It is gradual, a process of rediscovery that happens in small moments. The first time you notice a preference you had forgotten. The first time you say no without apologizing. The first time you laugh without checking whether the laughing is allowed. The first time you look in the mirror and recognize, faintly, the person who was there before. Each small moment is a recovery, a piece of the original self, surfacing from beneath the layers, and the surfacing, because it is real, feels different from anything the narcissistic relationship produced. Quieter, less dramatic, less intense, and infinitely more genuine. Think of the moments of recognition, the small, quiet returns of who you actually are, and how the returning feels like remembering something you forgot you knew. A familiarity that is more comforting than any intensity the narcissist ever provided. You do not need to come back all at once tonight. Let the self return at its own pace, and know that the person who is emerging is not a new person, but the original, the one who is always there, waiting beneath the performance for the safety to be themselves again. The trust you are rebuilding slowly is the self-trust that the gaslighting destroyed, the confidence in your own perception, your own judgment, your own feelings, that was systematically undermined by a person who needed you to doubt yourself. The rebuilding is the hardest part of the recovery because the instrument that was damaged, your trust in your own mind, is the same instrument you need to use to rebuild, and the using, while the instrument is still damaged, feels unreliable, shaky, uncertain. But the using is the rebuilding. Every time you trust your perception and the perception is confirmed, the trust strengthens a little. Every time you set a boundary and the boundary holds, the confidence grows. Every time you name a feeling and the feeling is validated, the self-trust repairs. The rebuilding is done not through thinking, but through experience, through the repeated, gentle accumulation of evidence that your mind, your perception, and your feelings are reliable, despite what you were taught. Think of how far the rebuilding has come, and how the distance, measured in small confirmations, is the measure of your recovery. You do not need to trust yourself perfectly tonight. Let the rebuilding rest, in progress and real, and know that the trust that was destroyed can be rebuilt. And the rebuilding, though slow, is happening every day that you live outside the system that broke it. The boundaries that protect you now. The boundaries that protect you now are the ones you are learning to set, the lines you are learning to draw, the limits you are learning to enforce, not as walls built from fear, but as declarations of self. The quiet, firm statements that say, I exist, I matter, and I will not be treated this way. The boundaries are new. They feel fragile. They feel audacious, as though the setting of a limit were an act of aggression rather than an act of self-respect. And the feeling of audacity is the last residue of the narcissist's teaching. The internalized belief that having needs is selfish and that protecting yourself is an attack on the person you are protecting yourself from. The boundaries do not need to be perfect. They need to exist, and the existing, however imperfect, is the revolution. The first time in the relationship, and possibly the first time in your life, that you have drawn a line and held it. Think of the boundaries you have set since leaving, however small, however shaky, and how the setting felt not like a wall, but like a declaration. The first words of a person who is learning, at last, that they have the right to take up space. You do not need to set any boundaries tonight. Let the lines rest, drawn and holding, and know that every boundary you set is a statement about your worth. And the worth, which the narcissist spent years denying, is something you are now, quietly, learning to claim. The love that will be different. The love that will be different is the love you will eventually receive and give. The love that will arrive without the intensity that disguised the manipulation, without the perfection that disguised the performance, without the speed that disguised the strategy, and that will feel, at first, like less, because the less is the absence of the tactics, and the absence, to a nervous system conditioned on intensity, feels like a lack when it is actually a health. The love that will be different will be quieter. It will be slower. It will be less consuming and more nourishing. It will not come with a glow, because the glow was a projection, and the love that is real does not need to project. It will not feel like a fairy tale, because fairy tales are stories, and this will be a life. Think of the love you deserve, and how different it looks from the love you received, and how the different, which your conditioned nervous system may read as boring, is actually the feel of safety, the specific, unmistakable, unfamiliar feeling of being loved without being controlled, of being chosen without being trapped, of being held without being consumed. You do not need to find any love tonight. Let the future rest, different and approaching, And know that the love that will be different will feel different. And the different, at first, will be confusing. And the confusing, over time, will become the new normal. And the normal will be the first love you have ever had that did not require you to lose yourself in order to keep it. You survived the unsurvivable. You survived the unsurvivable. And this is the truth that needs no elaboration, only recognition. You survived the charm that was a trap, the control that was disguised as love, the reality that was rewritten, the emotions that were weaponized, the games that were played with others, the identity that was slowly erased, and the cycle that seemed inescapable. You survived all of it. Not easily, not without scars, not without the long, painful, ongoing work of recovery. But you survived, and the surviving, which you may take for granted because you are still inside the aftermath, is an achievement so enormous that the person who has not lived it cannot fully appreciate it. And the person who has lived it often cannot see it, because the seeing requires a distance from the experience that the aftermath does not yet provide. Think of everything you survived and let the word land. Survived. The simple, heavy, undeniable fact of your continued existence. Here, now, lying in the dark, alive. And know that the person lying here tonight is someone who is tested in the most intimate, the most sustained, the most invisible way a person can be tested, and who passed the test not by winning, but by enduring. And the enduring, quiet and unremarkable, was the bravest thing you have ever done. The quiet after the storm. The quiet after the storm is what you are in now. The space after the leaving, after the understanding, after the grief and the anger and the rebuilding. The space where nothing is being taken from you and nothing is being demanded, and the only person whose mood you need to manage is your own. The quiet is unfamiliar. The quiet, to a nervous system that has been in survival mode for months or years, feels suspicious, as though the absence of threat must mean the threat is hiding, as though the peace must be temporary, as though the calm before the storm is the only kind of calm that exists. But this is not the calm before the storm. This is the quiet after it, the genuine, earned, permanent quiet of a life that no longer contains the source of the chaos. Let the quiet rest. Let it be what it is, not a pause, but a arrival. The first real stillness you have felt in longer than you can remember. The silence that is not a weapon, but a rest. The safety you feel right now. The safety you feel right now, lying here in the dark, in a space that is yours, in a quiet that is not loaded, in a stillness that is not a punishment, is real. The safety is not temporary. It is not a phase in a cycle. It is not the calm before anything. It is your life now, the life on the other side, the life where the eggshells have been swept away, and the floor beneath your feet is solid, and the air you breathe is not someone else's mood. Let the safety settle into your body. Let the nervous system, which has been on alert for so long, receive the signal that the alert is over. Let the muscles that have been braced for impact begin, slowly, to release. The safety is here. It is real. It is yours. The sleep that is finally yours is the sleep of a person who is free, who is safe, who is no longer being monitored, controlled, punished, silenced, or erased. The sleep is not an escape tonight. It is a rest, the genuine, earned, deserved rest of a person who has survived something enormous and who is now, at last, in a place where sleep is not a battlefield and the morning is not a threat. There is nothing to manage tonight, no mood to monitor, no eggshells to navigate, no performance to maintain. There is only you and the dark and the warmth and the quiet, simple truth that you are safe and you are free, and the freedom, which still feels new, is yours, permanently, unchallengingly, completely yours. Let the sleep come. Let it hold you the way you deserve to be held, gently, without conditions, without the threat of withdrawal, without the performance of caring, with the simple, real, uncomplicated warmth of a rest that no one can take from you. Sleep now. You are safe. You are free. You are at last entirely your own.